This is the Space Podcast.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How
Good.
are you?
I'm doing good. What's going on?
Just hanging out, just hanging out. I'm fasting,
Ah,
so it's not the usual, but we are going through it.
do you fast for health reasons?
Ramadan. The Ramadan season, it keeps on changing. So we have the Georgian calendar in the West. So Muslims have their own calendar.
Right.
So it's based on, I think, the movement of moon and sun. So every year Ramadan changes by 10 days. So it goes back 10 days. So like Christmas always happens on the 21st of December.
Yeah.
But the Islamic things, they actually keep on changing. Like sometimes they would be happening in winter and sometimes they happen in summer.
So you might have the same holiday happening in a completely different season, not even the same month.
Yeah.
That is really interesting. Is it so? It must be different than the Chinese lunar calendar because in the Chinese lunar calendar, Spring Festival may shift around a little bit, but it's always in the springtime. So what would be the determining thing, for example, for Ramadan? What determines it?
I think the Islamic calendar stays the same, but once you map it on the Western calendar,
Hmm.
then it starts to change. So on its own, I don't know which one is changing. I actually didn't really think about it because a lot of people in the Muslim world, they just do it, right?
Right.
But you're right. That's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but it does change every year. Like every year, like this year, Ramadan started, I think, on the 26th of April. Next year, it will start around the 16th of April.
So it moves earlier and earlier, but it keeps going. So could you have a July Ramadan? Is that a ridiculous
Oh,
question?
I've had Ramadan in July,
Wow.
and I've had Ramadan. Like, if you are a Muslim for 12 years, I guess more, much longer, but you can experience Ramadan in any single season. It would be winter, it would be summer, everything.
Uh, so I'm just curious, sort of the cutoffs, if you don't mind me asking, in terms of following specific practices. To what degree of, let's say, devoutness? Let me give you an example of a Catholic. I'm not a Catholic. I'm more or less an atheist, I guess. But some Catholics go to Mass on Christmas once a year, and some go to confession once a week. There are different degrees. So I guess to what degree of devoutness do you have to be to fast? And is it everybody? Is it 90%? Is it very devout, less devout? I'm just curious.
It's all or none. So, one of my friends, he says that he's fasting. And I think it's kind of similar in the Christian world where you fast, you can like eat certain fruits, you can drink water, stuff like that. In Islam, nothing. You cannot even brush your teeth. You know why? Because they say like toothpaste has certain ingredients
Yeah.
that subconsciously go down. So it's pretty much like hardcore. Like before dawn, you stop eating and you open your fast right at the sunset, and the time of sunset changes every day by like a minute, so you have to follow it. In the Muslim countries, it's relatively easy to follow because you have the, I don't know if you have been around the Muslim world, but they have the calls for prayer, like the
Right.
mosques have like a loud siren kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easier, but here in the West, you have to have a calendar which you print from a website. So it's pretty strict. Like, if you're fasting, you are fasting. And everyone who is above the age of 14 or 16, you have to be an adult. Like, it changes
For
from
development
culture.
reasons, I guess, right?
Yeah. So you have to fast, every single person. And to be honest, a lot of people do. Like, majority of the people who are Muslims fast. So the way it works is you eat something before dawn, uh, before sunrise,
Does it
and
matter?
you
Does it matter what? Is it any particular thing, or just whatever you want to eat, any breakfast?
whatever is available. So if
Yeah.
you're in Morocco, they will have their own kind of food. I was in Pakistan, so we have like our Indian thing. So there is a lot of diversity in that. You can eat anything, and that would vary from culture to culture. But during the process, You cannot. And one of my friends here, he's like kind of into Buddhist thought and he likes to fast. And he's like, oh my God, I'm fasting today. I did such a good job. I only had coffee and I only drank water. I'm like, that's not a fast. That's a detox.
Well, that's how I think in
fasting.
the West. I mean, because now the popular diet is intermittent fasting, right?
Yeah.
And the great thing about intermittent fasting is that you can drink as much coffee as you want when you're fasting, and so people do, right? So, but I mean, you're saying fluoride, coffee, anything, water?
No,
No. So
not
fast
a
is
thing.
nothing. No. What
And the
about
fast breaks. Like if you just drink one sip of water, like it just breaks. Like it will
right?
not come back. Maybe that's why it's so successful because they have these hardcore rules that you have to abide by. There's no middle ground over there.
Well, what about the? So I have two questions. I know this is way off our topic. So for those of us joining, we're going to be talking about Ex Machina, but I do have some questions because I'm doing daily fasting, but it's the intermittent fasting type of fasting where I still drink a lot of coffee and water up until 3 p.m. So I don't eat anything from 8 p.m. until 3 p.m. the following day, basically.
I
But
don't know how
yeah,
I feel about that. But because if you think about it, the word in itself, fasting, it means to eat nothing. Like that's the whole idea. Let
drinking.
me tell you something.
I'm drinking coffee. It's not food.
See, here's the deal. Our digestive system does not know what is liquid and what is solid. Like that's what people think, and it makes sense why they think so. They're like, oh, I'm not eating anything. But your body doesn't know. For your body, everything is a nutrient.
Right.
Some drinks are actually probably more nutritious than some foods. So I think that's I don't get it, and I'm not a big fan of like if you're fasting, fasting means to abstain, which honestly the reason I do it is it's good for your digestive system because in the age of modernity we have been so used to always having something in our food. Even when we are doing nothing, we are sipping on something because it's just so much availability. If you go 200 years ago, the type of grocery stores we have now, they did not have this
It
kind of
would be
stuff.
mind blowing to them. They would walk in and their brains would explode if they saw key food.
Yeah, and even like the interesting part for me, especially in the West, even like the lower middle class person can go to Walmart and buy a good amount of stuff, which is probably food for a king if you go back 500 years ago. That
Yeah.
much stuff. A
Didn't
king would have to work hard. So when I think about that kind of fasting, you are drinking stuff and you are eating something. So that's kind of define the purpose of the fast. For me, there are two purposes. One, as I mentioned, to not have anything in your digestive system, which is actually very good. It has many health benefits because you are just like clean and your digestive system is forced to become more efficient and it is forced to break down its own cells, which a lot of people say is good for cancer because it starts to break down its own cells. It's
toxins, fat burning, all of that stuff. Yeah.
all of that. And second thing, the reason I do it is self-control. You just feel so good by the end of the day. You feel truly accomplished because it's about it changes. Like if you are in certain countries, sun sets later in certain parts of the world. So here in New York, my fast is about I think 15 hours long. 15
Okay.
hours of nothing. It just feels amazing. By the end of the day, you feel like so accomplished. You're like, okay, I have exerted certain kind of discipline and I deserve the food now. And the way I take my first sip of water, once I open the fast, to be honest, it really makes you cherish like all these
It's a
things
very
we
good
just
point. Yeah. Well, that's I mean that's really interesting that it's sort of like a small win psychology sort of thing. The small win idea is you achieve something by default based on your sort of dietary habits throughout the day, and then that can sort of snowball into other small wins as well. It's in a way sort of a built-in confidence booster. Do you see when you're in that period any actual benefits physically in terms of I don't know weight loss or your ability to gain or lose muscle, anything like that?
well, I have lost about 3 pounds
Hmm.
and fasting Ramadan happens for a month. So by the end, people will definitely lose at least 10 10 pounds. But it really depends on you because at some point you are allowed to eat. So if you control that, because a lot of people, what they do is they fast the whole day and they eat bad stuff later.
They just go
That's
crazy
not a good.
later. Yeah.
They just munch on like sugary stuff and because they want it so bad. So it really depends on the person.
Right.
But if you do it properly, I think there is a lot of value. You will lose more fat and less muscle if you regulate it.
The thing that I think is interesting is you said, and part of it I would imagine is the religious component as well, right? So there is the religious component means that there's a cultural
Can you
component.
hear me clearly and everything? I can hear you clearly.
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly clearly. No
Right.
problem.
The religious component.
So the religious component is a cultural component, and the cultural component is something that gets to be built into the fast as a thing that everybody else is doing. So you have sort of not a peer pressure effect, but a people around you doing the same thing effect. And I think that one of the problems with intermittent fasting or someone doing my own little diet is that if you give up on it, nobody knows, and you're the only one who has to constantly make yourself do it. But if I were part of a group of people all doing the same thing and we had shared experiences, that would be a very different dynamic. I would be much less likely to break, I would think, because sometimes I do.
That's a very good point. And I am actually happy you recognize this because you don't necessarily live in that environment, but just to be able to think about it and be aware what would that entail, that's important. In the Muslim world, that's one of the reasons like religion and these things are so successful because they are a collective element. So as a collective, when you're in your house, in family, like when we were growing up, like there would be so much peer pressure. They will police you. Or are you eating? Like if you eat in front of people, even random people in Pakistan, they would look at you
the
like
judgment. Yeah, that like jeez.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like taking your pants
Like,
off in public.
man.
Yeah.
And you will have to give
Yeah.
explanation. Like you will have to tell them, "Oh, I'm sick." That's
I'm
what you
anemic.
make up.
I'm anemic.
To
I
make-
have to. Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely the social component is so important. And also at the end of the day, like you don't just break your fast alone. You always eat with a family or you eat with friends and special meals are prepared. So there is something to look forward to at the end of the day. So the social component is definitely a huge, point here.
It's a really fascinating tapestry. It's sort of like a self-supporting thing. The practice itself is embedded in this tapestry of friends, family, the people around you, and that gives it not only more meaning, it not only gives you a sense of cherishing, for example, the meal at the end of the day, but as you said, also as a sort of self-supporting system to force you to do it. And I think that seems to me to be something that we're in the same book club, something that the modern Western world in general is lacking, a sort of, and I don't necessarily even mean religious. I just mean a sort of tapestry that everyone feels like they're part of. The tapestry of being American is probably insufficient because we're all sort of bubbled off in our own little things, and so I think it's something that we need to get back to somehow, if that's possible, because it would provide sort of a substrate that we could all exist on, and we would all have this common social understanding. And there are some things, but it's limited in a lot of ways, if that makes sense. Do you do you notice that here? I mean, coming over, yeah.
Of course. Yeah, I think there would be a pushback, and eventually I think people will have to come around. Because I feel like even if you go to the old days of Catholicism, like the different denominations within the Christian, there was a lot of collectiveness, and over time, due to many factors, we have definitely deviated away from it. But you can see among especially the young population, they have that feeling that something is missing.
Yeah.
So, but it's not easy, because individualism also brings a lot of good points. So it's kind of not really possible to have the both. So I think we'll see. But I think this is something for a next podcast.
It's definitely, yeah. We can talk about it maybe in a future podcast, or maybe there's a film or a book that we can use as sort of the centerpiece for that theme, because that is an interesting one as well. I think we do need a modern myth of some kind. I think we're missing a myth. We need a myth. We don't have it. Now our myth is money, and that's all we have, and it's insufficient because it's superficial. But let's get into what we're here to discuss. So just to sort of set it up, we're going to be discussing the film Ex Machina. We've both seen it. I want to do a brief summary of the film, very brief summary for anybody who has not seen it, who wants to sort of follow along in the discussion. We will be talking about spoilers, so anybody who's watching who hasn't seen the film and doesn't want things to be spoiled, then it's probably best to stop here and watch it and then come back and listen. But if you don't care, because it's it's a few years old now, then feel free to listen along and then you can watch the film and see if you can catch stuff that maybe we didn't catch. But I do want to do a quick summary just to sort of cover that. Do you want to give it a try, or would you like me to?
I think you'll do a better job.
I'll just give a very brief summary. If I miss anything that you think is important, please just let me know. So, there is a young guy who works at a tech company who wins a prize. He works at this huge company that's very Google-like. It's not Google, but it's supposed to be Google. It's called Blue Book. And he gets to go to, when he wins the prize, he's a coder, he gets to go to the creator of the company's house. He thinks it's his house. He gets to spend a week there. That's his prize. So he flies there over this huge territory of wilderness and ends up in this research facility. It turns out to be not his house exactly. It's his research facility. And discovers, after signing a very interesting NDA, that he is there to be the human component of the Turing test for an artificial intelligence that the creator of Blue Book, this sort of eccentric billionaire, maybe trillionaire, I don't know, creator of this company is working on. And he's to be the human component of the Turing test for that AI. And the Turing test is this test that Alan Turing came up with to determine whether or not some artificial intelligence is truly an artificial intelligence. Truly sentient, I think, is the test. And we can get into that. And so it's this series of sessions where Caleb, the main character, or maybe the main character, is going through these discussions with the AI, which is this female artificially intelligent robot named Ava. And throughout the film, after the sessions, he's discussing his takeaways and his insights with the creator, Nathan. Nathan is an alcoholic. He has major drinking problems. We find out that he's created many versions of Ava, and Ava will not be the final version. And Caleb gets sucked in, and he maybe falls in love with Ava. And it becomes clear over time that Ava is actually manipulating Caleb. And he devises a plan because Ava tells him that she would like to escape and that Nathan is a bad person and he's a monster. He devises a plan to allow her to escape. And she does. And she kills Nathan, her creator. And as she's leaving the compound to be free, I don't know, we'll talk about that. But as she's leaving, she locks Caleb into the room that he was in. And he had thought he had been building up a rapport with her. They had had a relationship. She really cared about him. She was showing compassion to him and understanding to him. And they had sort of been building up this thing, this tension between them throughout the film. And he had this understanding that they would sort of go away together. But then at the end of the film, she leaves him in the room, probably to die, because he can't get out of the room. And she becomes the only thing to leave the compound. Nathan and Caleb dead at the end. Now, I know I skipped over a lot of stuff in the middle, but I think we can get into that as we go along. Is there anything obvious that I missed?
No, I think that was pretty good.
Okay. So I think we can sort of break it down by piece. I want to talk about artificial intelligence, and you had some comments. I think we can get into that as well. Consciousness. And then I want to actually talk about Nathan, because I think Nathan is a really key component of the film. His being in the film is a really key component. But we can get into that stuff. So in terms of the actual Turing test, I saw the film as sort of questioning that the Turing test is valid, period. That the Turing test is a way to determine if an artificial intelligence is actually an artificial intelligence, and that maybe there are different criterion that are needed to do that. So I wonder, did you see it the same way? And then, if so, what is the right way to evaluate if an artificial intelligence is actually sentient, or an artificial intelligence that is at the same level or higher than us?
I think it's a very good metric, and it essentially is that if you meet someone who is, made out of AI, and you cannot tell the difference between them and a human, that means they have ascended all the other boundaries that are between that. Like if I talk to Alexa, if I talk to Siri, I mean, even a child will tell you, okay, this is something else. This is no way related. Because the intelligence of Alexa is not even a 1-year-old. So it's a completely different thing. But if you cannot tell that it's a human or not, I think that's a very good criteria for, seeing what it is.
Would you agree? I sort of saw the film as sort of throwing that into question, wondering if that is the right metric, because she's passing, and yet at the end of the movie she does something that most humans wouldn't be capable of, which is to let the person who saved her just die without feeling anything. In other words, the empathy that she showed is not empathy. It's emulated empathy, if that makes sense.
That's an interesting point. I think I had the other view.
Okay.
I thought she did a good job, because one of the main things as a human is selfishness. Like there's the book called The Selfish Gene. Like the reason all of us are here today is because a lot of our ancestors were very, very selfish. Millions of years ago in the forest, they probably even their own families, they were able to take certain steps that were not the most loving, but for the sake of the hardware programming we have. So in that sense, I understood why she did that.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason, now you were talking about empathy. So I think it's very interesting. Now we can also talk about the personalities of AI. Like a lot of times when we talk about a human, we talk about empathy, and computers don't have empathy. But here's the deal. A lot of humans also vary on that scale.
Sure, yeah.
In terms of their personality. So I think that's something interesting that you brought up, because whenever we're talking about AI and we talk about amazing AI, we'll be like, oh, it will have empathy because it's like the deepest human emotion. Yes, but a lot of humans don't have it as much.
Right.
What's up with that? So if you are okay to understand this huge variance on the scale among the human population, I think you should also be ready to experience that in terms of the AI, because if it's really good, if it's really natural, some AI might be they might have a lot of empathy, but some people might not have empathy. So that's an interesting thing.
There's some possible blending there, so that the line is not clear between them. But it brings up another point about intelligence. First of all, I don't really know how to draw the line between intelligence and empathy, because empathy is built on a certain intelligence, the ability to understand another person's situation and then create a sense or an action based on that understanding, whether that's an emotion or an action. I'm not quite sure, but it seems like they're very closely linked. So I don't know how to separate those things exactly. And I'm also a little confused about the empathy. She has great empathy, but her empathy is fake empathy. She doesn't feel anything, it seems, because I think that's what they're saying. When she goes up the elevator at the end, she feels nothing about what she did to Caleb. She let him die. She doesn't care.
That could also be a show from outside. That's also another thing.
Do you think she's in angst inside? She has internal angst.
It could be.
Maybe so. Yeah. Yeah.
Because in humans, we give them the benefit of the doubt that, oh, he's acting like this.
Mm.
Maybe from inside, he's a soft guy.
Yeah.
That we should also give the AI that. Now, I see that's an interesting point. How do you draw a line between like intelligence and empathy? I think about it in terms of goals. What is the most primitive human goals? Survival.
Mm.
So I think humans will always use their empathy towards survival. So I think that's what it did really. It used its empathy in certain ways to lure him in, and then it used it to get out of the situation. So in that sense, I think it was kind of working on, its instincts just like humans would have.
Yeah.
And I think the reason she left him might also have to do with the instincts and survival, because she thought if she lets him out, there is a possibility that, like, maybe
Somebody
another
knows.
another important thing is, if you really have a very good AI, it will consider all the probabilities,
Right.
not just one. So let's say from 0 to 100, if the chance of him, what was his name?
Caleb.
Caleb. So if the chance of Caleb affecting her or destroying her was 10%, and 90% of the time she thought he won't hurt me. But I think being a very smart AI, she was like, okay, let me take care of that 10%. So I think that's what might have happened.
That's a very interesting point. So, in other words, maybe there is genuine empathy, but the probabilistic mechanisms that determine what actions she should take are stronger than that. In a sense, that makes her more capable. Like, did you ever see that movie AlphaGo? The computer that it's a great movie, but it's this AI that was built to play the game of Go, which is a very sort of naturalistic, probabilistic, completely non very strategic, but more like artful strategic game, and it was doing exactly that, evaluating probabilities and moving toward probabilities, even if the margins of the probabilities were very small. So it's a very interesting point that you raised. And maybe it wasn't even that Caleb would destroy me, but I can imagine 10 steps out a situation when I say something that upsets Caleb when we're in our apartment in 6 years, and he goes to the government and says, by the way, I'm dating an artificial intelligence. You guys should, tear her apart. And
exactly.
that many steps ahead is what she's thinking about. That's a very interesting possibility.
Maybe she's benefiting from the upside of emotions. The upside. See, emotions have upside and they have a downside. That's being human. But maybe a really good AI would be able to benefit from the upside, but it will be able to completely eliminate the downside. So that's, I think, very interesting.
Choose to feel nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, because we think, oh my God, she left her. She doesn't have empathy. Maybe she has it enough to get, her stuff going, but she doesn't get attached. So that's what it is.
Well, they say that when you see the old lady walking across the street and you have the strong urge to go and help her walk across the street, that's simply a byproduct of what we built for survival. So in other words, we slowly built up the mental capacity for empathy, perhaps for our survival needs, but then it also kicks in situations where it's not relevant to survival. And so that's why we feel I should help that old lady across the street. It's actually just a misfiring. It's like having sexual attraction toward an object that you can't procreate with, right?
I feel like 99% of our problems happen because of that. You get too attached to things. You have a relationship, or you want this, you want that.
Sugar.
So I think certainly it's a byproduct because it helped us in the jungles and a lot of other places, but it also creates a lot of unnecessary stuff. So maybe AI is able to filter through that, take what it wants, and be like, okay, we don't need you. So that's fine.
It's a very interesting thought. Sort of like we're the ones who are screwed up for caring about the old lady walking across the street. But it's the same for sugar. We eat too much sugar because we have a mechanism that needs sugar. Sugar is a good thing. When we crave sugar, we eat a certain amount of fruit, and that provides us with a certain amount of vitamins and nutrition that we need. But that goes way overboard. And that's why we eat way too much sugar. And we have an abundance of sugar now, so that's why we eat too much chocolate cake. It's the same.
Well, another thing which with her is then self-control. like AI will just be able to have so much more self-control
Yeah.
than us. I think that's a very scary part. I mean, it could be really good and it could have all the emotions and everything, but just think about it. If a AI has so much self-control, I would not want to compete with that.
Right.
You cannot compete with that.
Well, I want to get into that when we get into the consciousness part, because I think that's a really interesting part of it. The fact that it's not even self-control, because self-control implies the possibility of not having self-control and willpower. For her, it's not even a question, right? So she's built from a clean room. The clean room is she's been created. We have this sort of landscape of filth in our evolutionary history and all of these jammed together things that are competing and fighting, and it's a mess.
Yeah.
So she doesn't have that.
What do you think about her empathy towards, we discussed her relation and empathy towards Caleb. What do you think about her relationship and empathy towards Nathan? And I'll just make a quick point. She did seem to have a lot of empathy for that girl.
Yes.
The girl who was also used, so I did see a lot of empathy over there, a lot of relation. She could have completely destroyed her. She was as a higher model, she was like much better. She did not. She looked at her with like a sense of association, all those things.
One of us.
So what do you think about her empathy and relationship and the feeling towards her creator, who was Nathan? Do you think she had mixed feelings? Do you think she knew what's going on?
I was curious, because if I were going to create an artificial intelligence, I can't say that I wouldn't create sexy lady artificial intelligence robots. I might do that, but why would I create ones that had the inclination to hate me or were always trying to get out? Because remember, they showed some previous iterations, and there was the one girl banging on the glass until her arms fell off, and there have been many versions where they were always trying to get out and trying to escape. That's what she wants to do. She hates her creator. So I wonder if, one, are they evoking some mythological stuff there with the parent and the child, or the evil god and the child? And perhaps, two, is there something inherent in captivity? That is, whether you're an AI or an organic life form, captivity is captivity, and it always creates hatred toward the person who's keeping you in captivity.
Have you seen those Boston Dynamic videos?
The fake ones or the real ones?
The real ones where they're like beating on the dog and it comes back.
Oh.
They're beating with sticks.
Corridor Crew made a fake one, though, where there is a real one where they're pushing it, but the one where they're beating it and it fights back is fake.
Oh, it's a fake one.
It's fake, yeah.
So it was mostly like videographing, nothing they're actually shooting.
An effects team called Corridor Crew made it, and it's so real that...
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I know what you're
Honestly,
talking about.
I was scared after that because I was like, hey guys, if you're doing this to them, and if they get smart, like, I don't know when, in hundreds of years, and they're going to see what you were doing with us, I will be so concerned about that.
Well, the interesting question will be, even if they know that was simulated violence and that they were doing CG, the people who made it, CG, said, oh, it's okay, it's all computer generated. But when the AIs look back at the archives and they know it's CG, that's still depicting violence toward their kind, it may be considered the same thing. Yeah. Who knows? Well, I wanted to get into one of your questions was about the possible problems. So I think that's a good transition point to getting into some of the scary aspects, the more chilling aspects of AI, if there are any. I think there are, but I wonder if you have legitimate, if you think the fears over AI are legitimate, and which ones are, and maybe which ones aren't, and is AI something that we should be working toward as a positive future?
In my
Not only robotic AI, by the way. I don't mean specifically a robot walking around. I mean general artificial intelligence wherever it happens to exist.
I think a lot of people, when they think about AI and something can go wrong, they think about malevolence. They think they would be evil. Okay, of course that could happen, and that's a worst case scenario. I don't even think about it. I think about it in very simple terms. Here's the deal. If the goal of AI is X, they will just remove anything what comes between that. So that's how simple it is. They don't have any, they don't even need to have any kind of personal grudge against humans. The deal is, if this is their goal and they are here, we happen to be in the middle, they will just remove us. So
Yeah.
that's the thing I have. It's very simple. Like, they don't have to be evil, they could be the nicest guys, but we just happen to be between their goal, we'll be gone.
We don't hate the ants that we kill when we build a building. And
Exactly.
yeah, there's some scientist or some thinker put forward the idea of, I think it's called the pencil problem. You heard of that? Where
I'm not.
one artificial intelligence with the capacity to make pencils from anything had the goal coded in to make pencils and turned the entire universe into pencils
Dear God.
and wiped
Yes,
out
that's
everyone
crazy. That's
because of
crazy.
the one code line that said make pencils. So yeah, it is interesting that we don't have to we ascribe the malevolence, but it's not there inside. It's just a goal.
Well, then that's the another thing. Who is making the AI? Like the guy we saw in the movie, Nathan, he's not a very good creator. Like that guy was drinking, he seemed to have mood, he was super moody guy. So it really also depends who is making it, because it would mimic their personality. Like if a guy who is making it, he's like a Jesus kind of guy, the AI might be very nice. But if the guy happened to have some inner, like, things, they could come out. So that's another factor, like who really gets to say what is going on. If someone is making AI somewhere in an apartment building in Singapore, that's going to be very different than somewhere in Silicon Valley, because those two people are different. So that in turn could affect the level of malevolence, the level of goodness, all those things.
To an extent, I agree with you on that. However, I would add one point, which is the concept of the wetware that is being run inside of Nathan's AI is taking all of the data from all people's voices and I believe it was their voice data and their images from around the world, from every cell phone on the planet. So how much of it is the creator and how much of it is the data that gets filtered through? I mean, if AI is based on a learning algorithm, the learning algorithm is doing most of the work to create the personality, and the creator at some point no longer understands his creation, right?
Yes, that could be said, but here's the thing. I see that you're saying the data is coming from all over the place, which means it will have a very high level of diversity. Now, the filters, you always need filters, because raw data like what is in Google, that's just a crazy amount of data. So you need some kind of filters in place
Yeah.
that will filter the data in particular ways
Yeah.
that you are fed in.
Learning algorithms. Yeah.
Yeah, so those algorithms, I think there is a chance that there is a level of bias involved in those algorithms. Do you remember the part how I was just so shocked how like the data is being collected? I think her face looked like what he used to see in porn videos.
Right. I think that's what I think they said that her appearance was based on his porn profile.
That's so crazy.
Well, it's a good tactic. That means that he has a strategy. So to some extent, he is manipulating it, and I think his link to his creation is quite interesting, and the interplay between them. One of the dangers so in addition to as you were talking about, not needing malevolence, just needing a goal, I agree with that one completely. But I think another one of the dangers is, and Elon Musk has mentioned this quite a few times, so I'm kind of taking from that. But it seems like one of the real dangers is not having any shared interests, any shared goals, and the fact that it can exponentially get to a point where we don't have any understanding of what it's doing, right? So we have the idea that someone learns, and when they learn to a certain point, we have an understanding that they're very intelligent. But the ramp goes up so suddenly that they're exponentially more intelligent than us. So it's dangerous in the sense that we just don't understand what's going on. Not necessarily that it's even doing anything, but just that it is 10 steps ahead. 10 steps ahead. We're babies compared to it. And then the other thing is the shared goals thing. If it starts to develop goals that are separate from our goals, then the pencil problem is very likely. So how do we bind together our goals and its goals? And I think the Elon Musk solution would be implants.
Implants in us? Or...
Implants in us, in our brains. In other words, we co-evolve so that the implant is used by us for certain things and we co-evolve with it.
Yes, that could be said. The neural link.
Yeah, neural link, and we are as the technology develops, we are using it at every stage, or maybe it needs us at every stage too.
That means we will also be giving up on some of our goals. So it won't necessarily, in that case, would be coming towards us. We might be going towards them as well. So we might also end up in something very weird that we have no interest in, but just for the sake of cohesion, we are like, yeah, we have to deal with this thing now. And I can't imagine what that would be. Just think, what would their goals be? I don't know. I can't think of what would they want.
Well, there is actually a decent model of this in science fiction. Have you ever seen Star Trek? Are you familiar with?
A little bit.
Are you familiar with the Borg?
I am not.
Well, the Borg they're cyborgs, and they co-evolved with their they have biological components mixed with mechanical electrical components, and they co-evolved, and they became so integrated as a collective that their only goal is to integrate more things. So that kind of makes sense as a goal. As we move closer to that, I actually could see us becoming sort of Borg-like in that sense, in that we become more linked to each other because we have a higher bandwidth of communication. So we're all sort of linked into the internet as sort of little nodes in the internet, and we can't have any individual goals because that might cause chaos. And so we have to have a shared goal, and the only shared goal that makes sense is to expand the knowledge base, expand the experience base, and get more stuff, basically.
But for the sake of what? What did the Borgs? So they used to integrate more, but what was their goal after that?
That was their only goal, as far as I know.
It.
Yeah. Well, moving toward perfection of some sort.
And that's it. That's I don't know. I don't know about that, because I feel like
it's depressing. Yeah.
No. But the thing is, there is a missing link there, because you seek perfection for the sake of something. You're like, hey, I want to have like a six-pack. I want to have this. I want to have the best body. But you always have something above that. You're like, okay, because I will have this, I will have that because of it. So I feel like there has to be some end goal. It doesn't have to be one. Again, that's another problem with humans. We think in terms of linear and like singular visions.
Yeah.
Like they might have many
very
goals.
Binary. Yeah.
Yeah, but what I am interested in, at a molecular level, they will be different. Like we are attracted to warmth, we are attracted to food, we are attracted to pizza. Like at a molecular level.
I love that last one. I'm very attracted to pizza. I haven't had it in weeks though because of the quarantine.
So, we are just so human in these things. We love sunlight. They might be attracted to some weird things. They might be like, there is this planet 40 galaxies from here. We want to go hang out over there.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing.
But that goes to the earlier problem that I mentioned. The earlier problem that I mentioned is not malevolence, but it's just the fact that as soon as the like for example, that AI that beat the Grandmaster Go player, the Grandmaster Go player won one game out of the however many there were totally. So that was sort of like a ray of hope, like, oh, a human can beat it. But now it's about 30 steps ahead of that. It is now beating itself at that level like it's nothing. So we have no understanding, no conception of that. And if an AI gets to that point, then the curve is so straight up that we have no comprehension of it. When they start to place us in little human zoos, or they start to go to other planets, there's no recourse. There's nothing we can do.
And we haven't even started quantum computing yet. Already it's doing so well. Just imagine it having quantum skills. I mean, it's gonna be beyond imagination, the level of power it will have.
It's quite scary. Is there any reason for hope? Any optimism? I guess these two questions tie together. You had asked if is there anything to be optimistic about, and I wanted to tie that into the idea of the part in the movie where Nathan says, "Man, they're gonna far exceed us. They're gonna look back at us like we look at cavemen." I think that's what he said, right? And
Here's the
so
deal.
the question would be, so don't do it. Stop. Just stop. But he doesn't stop. So why not stop? Why keep going if we can see the danger ahead? And is it because there's something to be optimistic about too? Or is it just because we can't stop because we're people?
Okay, that's a very good question. Now, in order to answer that, you have to first recognize, before we say, should we stop, we have to recognize what is happening so far, what was really happening. And now there are two options and two different views. One is humans are creating AI. Humans are creating computers. The other part is very interesting, which one of my friends mentioned one, and it resonated with me. He said, since the dawn of time, human beings have been the reproductive organs for technology. So it's not that we are necessarily creating them for our utility. I think what's been going on is we are just the reproductive organs for the sake of producing it. So if that is what has been happening, there is no stopping. There is no stopping
Right.
over it.
They're engineering us to want to make them more, right?
I mean, if you look at it, like in the last 3,000 years, like the level of technology has gone up like this, whereas our growth has been like a human being 3,000 ago versus now, it is very similar.
Yeah.
But technology is improving constantly. So it's not that you can really think about it that we are the ones who are being used for the sake of them.
We're
So I think
yeah.
it's
We're their
very,
hardware. They're our software. They're running on us in a sense.
in a sense. Now it's the tricky part. Should we stop? Here's the deal. The thing is, AI meets our short-term goals. Our short-term goals are self-driving cars. Our short-term goals are going to Mars.
Good
Our
assistance.
short-term goals, yes, our short-term goals are, having phones and Alexa that can talk to us very nicely. And we really need it, like not just for the sake of like AI or technology. It's just like, to be honest, it's like more of a human need these days. Like you need self-driving cars because of accidents. Okay, medicine. We actually really, really need AI. So it's so interesting how our short-term goals are met and we need it no matter what happens. So if you have really, really good AI, they will be able to create drugs which are very cheap, I can imagine, which work very fast, which have less level of side effects. And that's where the medical world is going. That's where everyone else is going. If you have AI, a good AI, it can pretty much revolutionize anything. It can decrease the number of accidents we are having. It can decrease the number of diseases we are getting. It can improve the health of our food. So see, it is meeting our short-term goals.
We'd probably already have a vaccine if AI were running the show for COVID. Probably.
If it could have identified COVID a while ago. It could have
with the right protocols in place. 100%. Yeah. It's the humans are in the way causing the chaos. It could have figured it all out a long time ago.
Definitely. So that's kind of interesting. What do you think about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. So a couple things. Number one, we have to go there because it is human nature to go to the next step and not stagnate. And when stagnation happens, things go wrong in the culture. So it's human nature to progress, even if that progress is dangerous. I mean, you could say to Christopher Columbus or any explorer, hey, why do you want to go across the ocean? I mean, it's dangerous. It's scary over there. Who knows what you're going to come across? You might fall off the side of the earth because it's flat, Well, he didn't think it was flat, but that's the idea. You have to move forward just because it's built into human nature. Now, to the point of being short-term as opposed to long-term, it's almost like we have to build the track in front of us. We have to make sure that the next stage isn't possibly a catastrophe if possible. We have to evaluate, as we're building virtual assistants, as we're developing medical technology that's able to iterate at an incredible rate, create vaccines, identify cancers, come up with any sort of solution that we might need, we have to be aware of what left turn it could take and decide on a plan of action that meets that possible left turn. In other words, if it does this, is there anything that we can do to immediately nip that in the bud? Because each branch is a branching tree, right? So we need to be able to identify where the branches are and which branches can lead to catastrophes or calamities of some kind in the future, and snip those as they happen, as the AI is sort of facilitating or meeting our immediate needs. And if we can do that, that's sort of like building the track as you go, then I think we might be okay. But that is only if we can do that. And then the other one thing I wanted to mention quickly, just because you brought up the idea that the AI is sort of farming us in a sense, which is very interesting, but couldn't the same thing be said for genes? Couldn't we say that our genes are, in a sense, farming us or using us as their organisms to iterate themselves? I can imagine sort of, if you imagine let's say there's a brown eyes gene over here and a blue eyes gene over here. If you imagine these two sort of hulking beasts in Europe over the landscape, one is a blue eyes gene and one is a brown eyes gene, they're just burning through bodies generation after generation, fighting the battle back and forth. It's kind of the same thing.
It's true. I think it's true because you can see these days, like that gene you're talking about, it certainly is doing a good job because today our mortality rate is the lowest. Like in the old days, I don't know, probably half of the babies or something, so many babies just died for no reason, like for stupid diseases. So you're certainly right.
Sanitation as well, but yeah.
Sanitation as well, some diseases, just so many problems. Some probably were just out in the forest because we didn't had like this like housing and like all the things we take for granted. So in a way our genes are actually working towards that. That is also a valid argument, very valid argument. Now coming to something you were saying before, you were saying, if it's growing, why don't just nip the bud before it gets sort of out of the control or before it takes a wrong turn, just have a rule over there to stop it. Now, Elon Musk created OpenAI, the NGO, and I think that's an amazing idea. The reason why he created that is we don't know what's going on in China or Tokyo or India for AI. In India, in China, in US, there are like thousands of companies scattered all around.
Yeah.
Like, in the movies you see like a guy spills a drink and something is just created. That's the same thing. Why? Because no one knows who's gonna spill the chemicals. So it's so decentralized. Like we don't know what's happening in an AI lab in India right now. I mean, some random guy over there could just take some bad steps and we won't know what is going on. And by the time we know about it, it would be too late. So what I'm getting at is the creation of AI is so decentralized right now. And I'm not saying it should be centralized, right? That doesn't make sense either. But just because it's so centralized, it's very hard to see or to regulate that.
Well, you were talking about possibly setting up a criteria, right? So what would a criteria be? And if we say, for example, AI passes Turing test, kill it immediately. I don't know.
Yeah.
What are the protocols? What are the criteria that we have in place to, if possible, prevent a mess, or is it futile? I mean, you were saying that it's such a mess right now. It's kind of hard because there's so many firms working on so many different things. It could spring up anywhere. Do you need a governing body? Do you need a metric that's universal? I mean, there are metrics that are universal in companies. A metric that's universal in a company is if the company has a good balance sheet, then it's succeeding. And if it has a bad balance sheet, then it does other things. Those things determine what the company does. So is there something like that you could put in place or use as a guide or a gauge to figure out when things could potentially be going in a dangerous direction?
I think that's the goal. that's where we need to be. But if you see like United Nations, like we are honestly, this whole corona situation just made me realize how far behind we are. Like, let alone like dealing with AI and stuff. Like these diseases, like World Health Organization, that is supposed to be the governing body, and that gets hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Like these diseases are not something super advanced. Like people understand them, scientists know what's happening. It's not rocket science how to prevent these diseases. You take preemptive measures. But what really surprised me was like, let alone governing AI, these guys cannot govern like these kinds of pandemics. Like they are given hundreds of millions of dollars every year, and they could not even just like tweet, "Hey guys, close the borders." They could not do that.
Well,
So it's just
yeah.
like
No,
they're so behind.
that's a very interesting point. That's, by the way, that's the reason I don't believe most conspiracy theories. I think conspiracy theories are very interesting, but I think that we're too inept to do any sort of global conspiracy theories. We're just too hopelessly inept
I mean,
and
yeah, it does
unorganized.
not make sense. And it's just like people who have so much time. I mean, that's another discussion. I'm on your page. I mean, it's kind of, but it's good fiction. Like, okay, think about
It's
it.
fun. Yeah, it's fun.
But the thing is, conspiracy theories, and if you think about it, okay, let's say China did that. Dude, they lost a lot of lives. Like, they're not stupid people who are just gonna fuck around with these things. You don't do that.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
you don't start a fire in your house.
There you go. That's all you need to say. I mean, I completely agree with you, but I also agree that it is a tangent that might be covered elsewhere. Is it seems to me like, sort of taking from the film and the discussion we've been having, the way that we determine what is potentially dangerous is right now extremely limited. And we need to, before we decide if the future is potentially disastrous, decide how we decide what is potentially disastrous. And that means coming up with the right kinds of measures. And I think that probably means coming up with the right kind of Turing test as well. Going back to the Turing test idea, I think that the Turing test is too much of a general heuristic, because you could have one person say, "Oh, she seems real to me. I don't know," and they don't really think about it. It's very subjective. How do you analyze it in a deep way? And we were talking about empathy. Can you analyze the empathy, the EQ of an artificial intelligence beyond just their ability to communicate at a sort of native level? And as you said, there's a spectrum there for humans as well, but I just think that that's the area where we're way behind. And, before we unleash any sort of AI on our international system to prevent pandemics, I would want to know, what are those criteria that we have? What is the 21st century Turing test that we have before we say, all right, let the AI loose, let it control the WHO, let it lock down the borders? I would want to do that and then sort of let it go.
Luke, I think I just see so many problems, like, because we could face, like, let's say we come up with the amazing criteria. Like the governments could disagree. Who's gonna
Yeah.
say what? Like China is saying, okay, we want it this way. Hong Kong this way. India, we want it this way. Russia, we want it this way. Saudi Arabia, oh no, we have this understanding. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, everything is subject to socio-cultural norms. Everything is subject to the history. Some countries might be benefiting from that technology. Do you think they will let that go? Like any country who can get oil because of that technology, they will not let things go. They'll be like, no, it is happening within this jurisdiction. And to be honest, you cannot do anything. You cannot force them to do anything. So I feel like there is such a big problem with enforcing those things, even if we have them. And as you mentioned, like, what would that criteria be? Now, the interesting thing is, the problem we are having with creating a criteria is, deep down we want AI to be pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Like deep down
We want it to
to
be
be
really
so
good.
really good. So how do you get both? It's kind of impossible. Like you cannot have it good. Like when I talk to Alexa, I wanted to understand. Like I wanted to understand, hey,
Yeah.
this, I want this, get it done. I don't wanna, understand it just like a human. That's what I want. On the other side, we cannot really just stop it from getting there, so there is that internal conflict. We want it to be so good, like a scientist who is sitting in his lab and he's like, oh, I have these ideas, and it just talks to his AI assistant, and the AI assistant can detect all the molecules, tell him, oh, I just had them shipped from 40 countries, all the chemicals you need, like those
Right.
kind of, is that what we want?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we don't want it to be too good. So the question is, what do we define as too good?
Yeah, right. That's the question. That is the question. What is too good? Exactly.
Too good. Now, moving forward with that is, even if you stop it before it gets too good, it could be
Too
pretty
good.
close.
Too good. Too good
Could
is
improve.
too bad. Yeah.
So how do you stop? So the thing about AI essentially is it can relearn. The most dangerous thing, what people say is, it can alter its own code.
Right. Yeah.
So if you put a shutdown code in there, it could actually just alter that. So
Right.
who's going to stop it?
Right, exactly. It's better at doing code than you are at some point. And if you teach it how to do its own code, then you're also teaching it how to undo your code. And it is learning not from you, not from the training data that you're feeding it anymore. It's learning from its past iterations. It's playing itself for the next iteration always. And so that's where it runs away. I like that you call the metric what's too good. I think that's a good way to say it. But ultimately, I do agree with you. I mean, enforcing that sort of thing internationally, we're still too fragmented. Planet Earth is still too fragmented culturally, socially, economically to. I mean, just to try to get Beijing and Washington to get together on something like that, it's not going to happen. It's impossible. Well, maybe we can. I want to sort of change gears. We've been talking very much about AI, and I think that we've covered the territory pretty
We
well.
forgot about the movie.
Well, let's get back to it. I mean, I sort of see it as more of a springboard. So I think that the AI stuff naturally goes in that direction. But I do want to get into some other areas because I think that there are a lot of other interesting points that the film brings up. So maybe we can get into the consciousness aspect. And this could be, I mean, you could say this is close to AI too, but I think it's a kind of separate category. One of the things that's pretty central in the film, they're always standing in front of that Pollock painting, showing that Pollock painting. I'm not a Pollock expert. Okay. So I don't know that much about his work. I can't even necessarily say I'm a great fan of his work. But surely this film is trying to use that to say something about the nature of arriving into consciousness. That's what I can say for sure, whatever that might mean. I'm wondering what you took away from that image or that motif from the film.
At some point, I remember Nathan explaining what it is, but I actually forgot what it was. What was the painting about?
His painting is just looks like a mess, right? It's just a bunch of colors, and it's a bunch of lines and colors that he dripped. It's a drip painting that he dripped on the canvas, and I think Nathan was saying, I can't remember the exact quote, but I think Nathan says something along the lines of somewhere between being in control of your actions
Yeah.
and giving up control. Somewhere between those two, or maybe a blending of those two, being in control and losing control. As though, Pollock knew what he was doing, but he couldn't put the paint exactly where he wanted it to be. So there's sort of a line that's being walked with the painting. And I think that's trying to say something about maybe the nature of creating a consciousness or the nature of consciousness itself. I sort of saw it as this is just a possibility. But, when you are doing something creative, building something, creating something, you're bringing together pieces of things that you've experienced in your life, and those are sort of external that have been internalized by your memory, and you're calling those things up in order to put something out of yourself, right? So there is control there, but the things that you're bringing in, you didn't control those experiences that you have. So you're sort of processing the external world in the moment and creating something with it. But at the same time then, if we're talking about the sort of Jungian collective unconscious, there's also stuff that's gurgling up from the depths. Your childhood, maybe in a Freudian sense, or stuff that's further back, ancestral sort of genetic stuff that's gurgling up, that's determining what you do in the moment. And so I think the idea is the painting is a snapshot of all of those things together. You're capturing that moment when that artist was pulling from the external world, doing something with intention, which is painting, and allowing the internal gurgling, whatever it is in the unconscious, to sort of come up and express itself. All together creates this work of art. And because it's more instantaneous, I think that's why Pollock's work is so well known. Whereas a painting might take Da Vinci 6 months to complete, and every stroke is an extremely careful thing. That's more on the analytical side, right? It's not inspiration.
I like that. That's a good way to look at it.
But I don't know if that's right. That's just what I took from it. I don't know. They just kept
Well,
coming back to that image. Yeah.
Again, paintings and art is just so much subject to interpretation. So I doubt if there is something like the right explanation for that. But it makes sense, how you interpret it. What I was thinking about it was, you kind of have a goal. You kind of sort of have a criteria. You're like, okay, this is how I want to draw these lines. This is a very broad picture. But then you give yourself naturally some leeway. So you fix a goal. So in the painting or, in any work you are doing.
Anything. Yeah. I mean, not even art. Anything.
Yeah. You are like, I am making, I don't know, this drink. This better be like this, like this. This is your general criteria. But there is some leeway in there, which, again, we can interpret it in so many ways. Dynamism. Yeah, okay.
Dynamism. Yeah.
Dynamism, right?
Yeah.
So it's dynamic. It could be so many different things. So there is that idea of free floatingness. I think what makes Pollock's work so interesting is, I guess, it's kind of the best balance between the two.
Yeah.
That's what makes it very gripping. Because some people might go off the roof. They might just be wilding out in a painting. They might be all over the place. You don't want to look at that.
It's too random. That's it's too far on the random side. Yeah.
Exactly. On the other hand, you might have some nerds, some like very detailed, or you're like, no, this doesn't feel natural.
It's like a picture, yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to consciousness, because consciousness is the blend of both. It's like the best kind of mixture. Like, it's not too much here, but too much there. It's kind of just the right twist, and that really makes you think, okay, something is alive. Something is real. You don't want to be like a dust particle or a leaf just flapping wherever the wind goes.
Right.
On the other hand, you don't want to be something very rigid.
You don't want to be a gear. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what really makes it very interesting and what makes it very unique is the best blend between the two, which kind of makes you think about a genius. Like when you think about Apple or these products, you see that best balance. You see something is very systematic, something is very rigorous, but then you also see something is kind of free floating, something is kind of aesthetic. So I think that is what he was trying to convey in that painting, and I think that is what he tried to convey in his work.
Right.
The AI, and that's what he created, as in she has a structure, but there is also a lot of leeway that allows her to be herself.
Which is, interestingly, the thing that makes her hate him.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to ask you about that. That's a good point.
She hates him.
He could have programmed her to love him.
He could. That's exactly what I wanted to say earlier that I kind of forgot to bring up, is that if I were creating an AI, I would create it to say, "Oh, thank you, my creator, my dear creator."
Yeah,
But then, is it an AI or is it an automaton that is just doing what I programmed it to do? He has to give it the structure, the construct, and allow for maybe not randomness, whatever it is that is the conscious element of that to be what it is, in order for it to be the thing that he's trying to make at all. Otherwise, he's just creating a system that emulates that it's just a chess program. Chess programs are exactly what you code them to be, right?
Yeah, and you don't want it to be so free floating because that would not be grounded. That wouldn't make sense. So I really like that you brought up that painting and you explained it. And now that I think about it again, it's very nice and it's kind of very thoughtful. The movie had that as a backdrop in many different scenes.
Yeah.
And and then he specifically explained that, and I think it's amazing. Like out of all the works of art, they chose that, and they chose that explanation. So I think that's a good job in the movie.
I think there's a lot of that in the film. There are a lot of visual motifs in the film that are very intentional. That painting is meant to constantly bring you back to the idea that this is something that's created intentionally, but is fundamentally not under human control. In other words, Nathan is not telling Ava to flirt with him. She's doing that because she has her own impetus and her own drive, right? I mean, there are a lot of I think there are a lot of those things in the film, and I think that painting is just sort of a callback. Remember, we're looking at Ava. This is Ava's story. This is not a story about Caleb. It's not a story about Nathan. This is a story about Ava and her genesis from non-being to being a sentient thing. This is we're looking at Eden for artificial intelligence. We're watching the story of creation for artificial intelligence, and we have to pay attention to that. But who's the main character of the story of Eden? Is it God? Not really. Is it the snake? Not really. Those are important characters, but it's sort of like the snake is Caleb, God is Nathan, and Adam or Eve, I guess it would be Eve, right? Because Ava is close to Eve, and I think that's intentional too, is the first one that's sort of between those, is given freedom. This is just something that I think is intentional, but I could be wrong. So Ava is close to Eve. I think that's very intentional. Eve being the first woman. This is the first woman in the sense of artificial intelligence. Nathan is God, the creator. But the creator, the firm, patriarchal, rigid, unchanging God, can't allow an Eve or an Adam to be human in the deepest sense of human, of having knowledge, of knowing how to really make their own free choices, right? Because that's why the tree existed. The tree has this forbidden fruit that you're not allowed to take. And so then the snake comes along and creates a chaotic situation. Caleb comes in and creates a chaotic situation. The chaotic situation throws the perfect balance, and the perfect balance here is Nathan has full control. He can abuse these AIs. He can do new versions. He can put them in his closet. The situation is perfectly well contained. But in comes this uncertain element. In this case, it's Caleb. And Caleb throws the balance off. The snake throws the balance off, right? And the snake says, God is keeping secrets from you. God has hidden knowledge from you. If you eat from the tree, you will have the knowledge. And then you will become as a god. And that's kind of the same thing is going on here. Caleb's coming in and through these conversations, she's realizing that there is more to being than being in this room, and here is the way for me to get there through Caleb. And I have to overthrow God in order to get there. So I think this is a creation story, and that these two characters are sort of archetypal. Nathan as God and Caleb maybe as the snake. That could be totally off base, but...
No, I understand that. So you think if the snake Caleb had not entered God's kingdom, and it kind of looks like a heaven, the way the helicopter lands, the waterfalls, and it's just so nice. So if you think if he had not come there, would the fate of God and Eve would have been different, or do you think they eventually would they have reconciled?
That's a
Or
very good question. I think you need a chaotic element. I mean, in mythology, you need chaos in order to create. Chaos is the source of newness, of evolution and change and growth. So if Caleb represents chaos in a static system,
yes,
that's good in the sense of things moving forward. But as you said, would they reconcile? What happens if there's no chaos? If it's just Nathan and Ava, or Nathan and his AI girls forever? Does it just keep going? I mean, I don't know. It's a very good question.
Nathan, I mean, he seemed like a crazy guy, but he was pretty smart as well. Like, he
Yeah.
was very smart. So I was thinking, maybe, do you think he wanted Caleb to be a bad boy? Or do you think he wanted to come? I feel like now that I think about it again, I think he was expecting the chaos.
Do you think so? Do you think he wanted to bring chaos in, or do you think I don't know the answer. Do you think he wanted chaos, or do you think he wanted someone to genuinely test Ava? Did he want did he know he was going to die even? Did he want that? Because he's miserable. Why does he drink so much?
I think a guy like him would certainly be someone who would be willing to test the limits, and someone who believes in something who he has done, and he's willing to go very far, because the real testing is when you take it very far. Like,
Right.
if you want to test a
Stress
computer,
test. Yeah.
you run like hardcore stuff on it. Like, if you want to test a car, you put it in the walls, you throw it from somewhere, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think, and you can just see, like, yeah, he was drinking too much. He was kind of lonely. So I think he was willing to go the extra mile and be like, okay, let's see what really happens. Let's see if I'm good. And in a way, I think his test succeeded,
Yeah.
because AI beated all the expectations. It overcame its master. So that's kind of very powerful. That's human. Like,
Well, that's why the movie, I think, is called Ex Machina.
oh, I see. I didn't think about that.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
but you put it in a way, because Deus means God, right? But they've taken the word God out of the title and just put in Ex Machina, which means outside the machine, right? And so I think, because Ex Machina means something has come in. So Deus Ex Machina is when you have a story and it looks like everything is going badly, and then something incredible comes in out of nowhere and saves the day. And Deus is God, and then Ex Machina means from outside the machine, or outside the system. So here you have just outside the system. And so I think it's a call to bringing in Caleb from outside to inside into the system, this outside unknown variable. And this unknown variable is the thing that's truly giving birth to a genuine sentience of some kind, right? And that's the source of creation is Caleb. I mean, you could do a sort of egg and sperm analogy, I guess, but I sort of like the Adam and Eve one, because you can add in the element of the thing coming from outside, right? And I think that's that's the key idea. I mean, I'm not sure, because it's very nuanced and complicated, but your point is very interesting, that maybe Nathan was hoping this is a success for Nathan. Even his own death is his ultimate goal, is to create this thing. He's driven by, he doesn't even know, because he knows that it's dangerous, and yet he's compelled to do it. He said, I do it because I can. Wouldn't you if you could? And so whatever happens, happens. He brings in this element, as you said, this element causes the situation that allows for the specific steps that need to happen in order for her to become an actual person in the real world, right? An actual Turing test. It's interesting.
In the notes, I remember you had something from Nietzsche. I forgot what it was.
That was the death of God.
That of God. Okay. we can talk about that as well. And then another theme you have in Nietzsche is the theme of death of God, and then another theme in his philosophy is the theme of becoming,
Oh,
overcoming. So I feel like I really felt that strongly, that if you are really good, your creation is really good. One of the criterias that I think I'll judge it based on, if it can overcome its master.
mm,
And if your computer is very good, I mean, if it's like you want it to be, very intelligent, one of the reasons why humans are intelligent, like, you're growing up after a certain age, you have the ability and intelligence to overcome your fathers, forefathers, your culture, your religion, all these things that were very close to you. So I feel like Ava truly overcame all of these restrictions. And I think that's what makes it so gripping. And that really makes her like an amazing kind of AI, because she was really able to, like, literally overcome her master.
right, right. But it's still very disturbing to see. I mean, I find the last 20 minutes of the film to be extremely unsettling.
Oh my God. You saw how, I think I was so surprised, it was so vicious. She like slid the knife in him and other people. But did you notice how the knife went? Like in other movies, if you see knife, it's like kind of resistance.
Right,
Like you jab it in them. She went through him as if it was butter.
right. Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, dear God, like these things are dangerous. Like literally like butter, like they went in him. I was like, too extreme,
Very
too
scary.
extreme.
Yeah. Well, and it's also interesting that at that end of the film, then you see her shift. She shifts from this character you've seen as the girl putting on the stockings and dressing up for him, and you realize, oh, that was all just in service of this goal. And now that she's achieved it, everything else drops down to zero. Caleb knocking on the door and trying to get out, it's like it's not even there in a sense, because she's maybe made that probabilistic calculation already, right?
But she did have that going on kind of from the start of the movie. I think you can feel the way she talks. She was like thinking about her purpose.
Yeah.
She had like an inner rage throughout her dialogue with Caleb. You can feel an internal struggle, an internal questioning, and a rage. You can feel the anger in her. And I think that slowly came up. I wasn't surprised at the end, but I could see in the start it was building up.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Actually, that brings me to one of the things I really wanted to focus on. Maybe before we talk about the more of the Nietzschean stuff, death of God stuff, which I think is really interesting, you brought up biological consciousness versus silicon consciousness, and that ties very closely into the idea I wanted to bring up of juxtaposing the human psyche with the psyche of an artificial intelligence. So we're talking about when an AI becomes sentient, an Ava, let's say she's the first, is she sentient in the same way that we're sentient? Or is she fundamentally a different kind of sentient, a fundamentally different kind of conscious being because she's artificial? I mean, her paintings, she's not exactly, when we paint things, it's a mess, and she's painting these perfect images that look very sort of calculated. Does she become us as soon as she becomes sentient, or is she fundamentally different?
That's the, $1 million question.
Yeah.
It's very hard to say what it is. I am kind of skeptical in that regard, because if you think about humans, our consciousness stems from quantum level. It's based on biology, it's based on flesh, it's based on blood, flesh,
Yeah.
nerves, these kinds of things.
Protein substrate. Yeah.
Yeah. So that fundamentally, like, those things that are very small molecular level are very different than silicon.
Mm.
So I think a little while ago, 20, 30 years ago, or even before that, if we had asked that question, I think people could have been skeptical of both opinions. But I'm fairly sure that a lot of people worry about that part, about AI being like us. But I think it will be very different. I think it will be very different because on a very basic level, like the internal system that they have, it's just very different. Remember in the movie, in the start he went in the lab and he was showing how he created Eva, and he showed the skull.
Yeah, the wetware he has, the little it's sort of the brain.
Yeah, and he had a term for that. He said it like white something. It
He-
was a very nice thing.
Wetware, I think, is what he called it.
Wetware.
Wetware, yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So now the interesting thing is, I was like, okay, if they're really doing a good job, let them explain this. Like, let me see what they say. They did not say anything. They were like, okay, this funny thing we are holding in our hand.
Yeah, that was a little
this is the
lazy.
brain.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, that's not too fast. Not too fast. I'm like, okay, if you really want to make an amazing movie, explain that to me.
Yeah.
Because they just put it on the side. Now, okay, another thing. The whole acting by Ava, that was the girl. That was an actual girl. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was basically a human acting all of that. So it's so believable because of that. So if you remove both of those things, first show me exactly what is in that brain, what's going on. I'll be more motivated to look into that. And second, okay, have a robot do any of that.
Yes,
Nothing.
but yeah, I see your point. But that's sort of breaking through the fourth wall, right? That's where it comes down to suspending disbelief in order to feel the intention of a film, right? I definitely see your point, but it's an interesting question because Ava is in fact played by a human. We might get some of the cues that we have because she's played by a human, a real human being is doing her face and her voice. And
Even
we
then,
don't-
we were skeptical.
Right.
Even then, we were like, okay, let's look at it closely.
But the
Like, he had
question,
to-
yeah.
Mhm.
So the question would be, is it because the actress is a human that makes the film believable and would be believable in real life, or wouldn't be believable in real life because it wouldn't actually ever possibly even potentially be like a human to that degree?
I am fairly sure about that.
Well, that's a question that the future has to answer, whether or not that degree of complexity and nuance is possible technologically, right? Because he was talking about facial expressions, micro movements, everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's. I think whenever people say, "Oh, that'll never happen in the future," that always comes back to haunt the people who
Oh
said
yeah,
it.
yeah, of course. So many things we have said. Oh, it could never happen, and they are like common sense these days.
Right.
I mean,
just a cell phone.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's certainly not a good argument. We were like, oh, that's just super crazy. I mean, no, that doesn't mean anything. Now, another thing is, now the thing is, it can be very intelligent. It can be millions of times more intelligent than us. I was listening to this physicist, and they were saying a quantum computer could be able to compute something in a minute that might take all the time there has been, the duration of all the time through existence until
The
today,
entire universe.
since Big Bang till now, because it's just quantum. So fundamentally,
Yeah.
it works at a different level. Like fundamentally, if it's like 2x, it's not 2x. It's like just spreading at a very, very different rate that we don't even think of. You know, if quantum computing comes, all of our codes and passwords, they will not work anymore.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
Although I'm just saying at a fundamental level, and you can have a quantum computer AI, and that would be just, I think, amazing and crazy smart, like crazy smart. However, you have to see it is made out of silicon. Now, silicon, I would be very interested in when they can bond this stuff, the skin, like the real flesh, with AI. I think when that happens, that's the turning point.
Well, you have implants, people who have ocular implants who can't hear and they have electrical signals going directly to their brain. So you have some biological electrical interfaces. They're rudimentary visual interfaces. You can connect a camera to the optic nerve. There's that guy who has the thing that can sense color. It goes directly to his brain, and he
But
can.
it's not the other way around. That's what I'm trying to say. Like this laptop right now, I cannot really connect, and I don't know how to, connect those things. And I'm sure, I don't know, maybe we will figure it out.
I'm sure we will.
Maybe
At least
not.
electrical signals, right? We'll figure it out. Electricity is the common denominator, right? It's all electrical
No,
impulses.
I think there are a lot of other factors. Electric is one of them. Okay, then there is also dark matter. Like there is a lot of dark matter in us.
Hmm?
Dark matter. Yeah. There's so much dark matter in us and everything, right? We just don't know physics. It's just physics. So all of those things. Okay, we are a product of millions of years of evolution. Millions of years. Now, computers are pretty damn smart in certain things and they can easily outrun us. Like a rocket in a way is a computer. Like I cannot compete with how the rocket goes up. Like it's just crazy, amazing. But I don't think we are something that should be taken too easily. Like in some things, I have no doubt
Right.
computers can run circles around us. But at a very basic level, like we were made after millions of years of evolution. I mean, that will take a while for computers and everything to overcome.
Well, that's what's really yeah, that's a really good point, and that's one of the things I wanted to mention too. There's a very interesting aspect to the evolutionary nature of our development that can't seems like it can't fundamentally exist for an AI, because when you can imagine this sedimentary mountain slowly being built up over millions of years. Each layer is a change, an innovation, and when the new innovation is there, some of the stuff that's on the deeper layers is still down there, and it creates a lot of our problems. And it's almost like this underwater mountain. You know how Hawaii is actually an underwater mountain, right? And only the tip. Hawaii is a giant mountain. It's just that the top of the mountain is over the water. And it's almost like our consciousness is the island of Hawaii. And there's this massive thing under the water that's this huge mountain. And we
So I
can
love
only
that
see.
subconscious and the
Right,
conscious.
exactly. And so
Yeah.
maybe in a Jungian sense, right, our the mess down there gives us advantages and disadvantages. Some of our disadvantages may be all of the complexes that develop, and maybe our urges, all of the things that can go wrong subconsciously or unconsciously that Jung talked about. But also we have deep down, if you buy into the Jungian idea, symbols that we resonate with. Why does every human culture eventually become religious in some sense? Why do we seek after that sort of thing? Why do we have empathy, period? Why do we take care of our young instead of just throw them off a cliff? I mean, why do we do those things? And it's this mountain under the surface that's been slowly built up. Can an AI have that? It doesn't seem like they can have that. So there's something that's going to be fundamentally different between us and the AI. And it seems like Pollock's showing a bit of his messiness when his painting is chaos. It's a snapshot of his mental, sort of his chaos is a snapshot of that on the canvas. And when Ava paints a picture, it's not like that. It's a very neat, perfect drawing of something, and it's photorealistic, right?
But maybe the imperfection is actually the perfection.
Right. That's a short way of saying what I just said. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. I think it's very interesting. Well, we can also see what year was the movie made?
That's a good question. It seems like it might
I
have
think at
been
least 10,
2014 or 15, maybe.
15.
Yeah.
So one thing we have to understand is like, the movie itself represents like the most advanced version of our AI we have, which was like her being so good that she'll make the perfect portrait. But I can see maybe in next 50 years, the AI movies like Ex Machina, we will see the portrait she might make. It might actually be like a randomness and mixed, because it would become more realistic. So I think that's where we will be moving towards, and that will be something that will be something very beautiful, but also interesting, because
Yeah.
that will be something real.
And if we have, and if those actually come out, will we be able to understand them? Will they be able to understand us? Will we be able to live alongside of them, or will, inevitably we have a AI human war? I guess that's a.
But also, to be honest, like people, whenever think about AI, I feel this like pessimistic undertones in the whole debate. I'm like, first of all, what's the point of pessimism? Like, pessimism in certain cases can be good, but to be honest, in this case, it is not helpful. I'm never pessimistic about this stuff. Like, first of all, if you are pessimistic, if you're gonna get crushed, you are gonna get crushed. So first of all, just don't even think about it.
That's
So,
that's Nathan's attitude. Yeah.
you know, and the second thing is just have a good mindset. Just have a good mindset about these things. If something is gonna happen, it's gonna happen. Just move towards it in like the best hopes, optimism, because there are not just AI, there's just an asteroid could hit us and
Yeah.
literally we could vanish from the surface of Earth. That's one thing.
Yeah.
So many other things. I was actually watching this sun documentary the other day on Netflix, and it talked about how sun has these explosions, and actually a lot of the explosions travel towards Earth. And we haven't had a bad case, but once in 100 years, it's actually really bad, and it can destroy pretty much all the electricity we have on Earth. So like even the small cosmic radiations, these things, it's just not AI. If you really want to worry about things, there are like hundreds of things which are very serious, like a big earthquake. The earthquakes we have so far, they are so minor. Like, because in nature has no problem with going from 0 to 100 very fast. Like nature can just flip a button. So I feel like I understand that why people are pessimistic in some ways, but I think we should have a very positive attitude, do our best, and see what happens.
Yeah, I agree. But I also think it is important to recognize the fragility, to also just acknowledge how fragile everything is. We live on this tiny little thin skin around this planet that we're lucky has organisms that make oxygen that we're able to breathe. But we could, if a solar flare hit the Earth, and is it a solar flare? Whatever it is, hits the Earth, and there's a massive electrical EM pulse that wipes out the banking system. Any money that you have, it just doesn't exist anymore. You don't have any more money now. Sorry.
Yeah.
You didn't put it under your pillow. Bad luck. That we're close to so many of those things. We live on the precipice always of nuclear war and a solar disaster and AI and earthquakes and floods. I mean, we're lucky to exist in this peaceful time where we don't have an ice age, where we aren't constantly bombarded by huge earthquakes and super volcanoes that have happened in the past, and asteroids falling from the sky. We've got it really lucky. We're very lucky right now.
That's true.
Yeah.
But another thing is, we actually exist from our birth to now. Every civilization, it's like a very tiny, like, let's say this is the time duration. We exist like somewhere in here. We're just so lucky we are passing this like few thousand years and everything is chill. Like next few thousand years could be a bumpy ride.
Yeah.
So again, as you mentioned, it's just so lucky that everything's been pretty quiet.
It almost is too lucky, which makes me think we might be living in a simulation.
I see.
Not joking. It's a possibility. Anyway, that's another tangent. Well, you brought up Nietzsche before, and you talked about Nietzsche's idea of becoming. Do you think you could expand on that a little bit? Because I don't think I completely understood your reference.
So Nietzsche is an existential philosopher who is on steroids. His doctrine is very like hardcore. He's like, hey guys, living is very good. So there is pessimism and optimism. So one of his ideal was Arthur Schopenhauer, amazing philosopher, but he was sort of more pessimistic. He was like, we are in life, we are all these problems, and the best thing is to just keep quiet and just get going. Nietzsche, on the other hand, adapted a very different viewpoint. He was like, no, you gotta fight, you gotta overcome all these things, and that's what really makes you a human. So being human is to overcome. That was his main analysis. Like that's kind of the ground of a lot of his philosophical work. What is to be human? To be human is to overcome all things, overcome your worries, overcome your anxieties, overcome your insecurities, and create something new, create something beautiful, create the Eiffel Tower, create World Trade Center, all these beautiful things. That is his main motive in his philosophy. Now,
Become the Ubermensch.
become the Ubermensch. And the interesting thing is he doesn't really talk a lot about overcoming external things. He talks about overcoming yourself.
Well, that's the biggest challenge. The external stuff is a sideline. It's a sideshow, right? Isn't the internal stuff is where the challenges really lie, right?
Yeah, that's where the battle happens. And that's where, first of all, people are not aware because it's so much subconscious. As you mentioned many times before, there are all these layers and they can cause problems. So first of all, people are just not as much aware of their subconscious. Like, for instance, having bad eating habits or being lazy or like so many things, you're just not aware. How will you address something if you're not aware of it? So, and then the deepest battles lie within you. Like from inside, you recognize your impulses that could be destructive, that could be problematic. So what a warrior does, it overcomes itself. And that's kind of the most beautiful thing. You exercise so much discipline, you exercise so much self-control. Like a lot of people read Nietzsche and they think, oh, he's talking about all these crazy ideas, Ubermensch, go out and conquer the world.
Yeah.
He's actually talking about conquering yourself. Like he's really talking about a lot of discipline. So in that sense, in the movie, we saw how Eva, in a way, overcame. I'm sure she had a lot of anxiety and fears of going out to the world.
Well, it's hard to say, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say.
I mean, just looking at her and seeing how real she was, I'm sure she had like a feeling of what's out there. She probably was a little worried, right?
Well, some form of anxiety has to be there. Maybe if not our form, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's say even if you're a computer, you can't predict the future. You can predict it well, but you cannot be 100%. So maybe even she predicted 70%, 80% she'll be okay. There was that 20, 30%, and that's probably why she left Caleb in there.
Yeah.
So even as a computer, like people think, oh, computer will just know what's going on. Like even computers will essentially work based on probability. The difference is their probability understanding will be better than us. So they will understand those things better, but still there would be a big unknown for them as well. So they will just try to make the best decisions based on what they know best, all the data they have, and they'll kind of just go with it. They'll be like, let's see what happened, guys. So I think that's what she did. And I think that was kind of beautiful that she overcame like her imprisonment. She overcame her boss. And I think that's
her dad.
Her dad, yeah, her creator. And I think that's a very interesting theme in her, that she was able to go beyond.
It's an interesting idea. I'm also interested in the concept of anxiety as well. For in that sense, what is the experience for her of anxiety? We can't know, but we can know that she has. We also can't know that what we experience as anxiety isn't also just a probabilistic outcome. We make unconscious calculations about probabilities, and that causes an emotional response. We know she's kind of capable of some emotions because when she's out of the house, when she's out of the lab, she's in the sunlight and she seems to be experiencing it and actually enjoying it. So who's to say that that's not exactly what we feel when we feel anxiety? So that's a really good point.
And anxiety isn't a bad thing. Anxiety is, a lot of people worry about anxiety. At a very fundamental level, okay, whatever we have as human beings, depression, anxiety, a lot of the problems, like they are there for a reason.
Yeah.
Like they help you to survive. If you were not an anxious person, you probably would not pass your exams. Why would you be compelled to study so much, so hard for something? Because you're anxious. Oh no, I don't know what will happen. So a lot of these basic things we have as humans, first of all, they are very beneficial to us. Now, if we take advantage of them or not, I don't know. A lot of the high productive, super confident people, like people who have done so much in their lives, like a lot of them were also very anxious people, like Steve Jobs.
Well, they still are. they still are. They just have a good. They know how to use it.
Yeah, how to channel it.
Right. Well, think about someone who's started a business. Right. Starting a business. I have a business, and the act of starting a business is terrifying. It's total uncertainty. You're jumping off of a cliff and assuming that you're going to be able to build your wings on the way down, and because if you wanted to play it safe, you'd go and you'd get a job and you would make somebody else's dreams come true, right? But when you do something on your own, it's extremely scary. It's not that the anxiety isn't there. It's there, but you have to sort of do what Ava did, and you have to make a calculation and push yourself, in a Nietzschean sense maybe, overcome that aspect of yourself, but also use it in your decision-making processes as you move forward, and not ignore the anxiety, but sort of bring it within yourself, integrate it into your decision-making processes, I would say.
That's pretty good.
Well, I wanted to go to the other, since we were on Nietzsche, the other quote from Nietzsche that came to mind for this, which is Nietzsche said God is dead, right? And when he said that, he meant in a cultural sense, we have transcended the need for gods because we begin to become the gods. First, as primitive people, we create gods in that sense, and then culturally, let's say, and I think he was speaking specifically about the sort of the Western world, you take control of your environment, you invent things, you become rational and scientific, and you become the master of your, let's say, fate or destiny, and that replaces the need for the type of God relationship that was there before, which is, I don't know if the rain's going to be here, so let me pray or make a sacrifice or whatever it is. That relationship changes once we realize how to manipulate the weather and we realize how to be rational. And I think that, that's what he's kind of talking about. Except the process of, and I don't know if you would accept that explanation or not, but the process seems to be, first we create myths and we create gods in order to have something to strive for, to move toward, mythology throughout time. And then as we become them, we find we have nothing to strive for, so now we are them. But there was a very long transition period there. But with this story, it seems like the same thing is happening. The Nietzschean death of God is literal because Ava kills her creator, actually kills her creator. And there is also a lot of mythological reference to other, stories where you have to kill your father in order to become a true adult. In order to become a true adult, you must kill your father first, in a sort of metaphorical sense. That is happening in a microsecond compared to the time period it took us to reach the stage where we don't, quote unquote, need God anymore. And I'm not making any sort of religious arguments there. I'm just saying, as sort of masters of our worlds in the Nietzschean sense, Ava's able to do that in a very short span of time. So I find that interesting how it's sort of maybe a doubling, and then maybe those AIs will have another one where that one's a shorter period of time. Each time it's the same, where you have a sort of we're in the middle, we had gods, now we become gods, but now since we're the gods, you have someone who's now us, but that happens much faster. And then what is the thing that is now under the AI or the Avas, if that makes sense?
I might disagree there because I don't think the upcoming AIs were necessarily better. They will remove. If the God is working in their purpose, if the God is suiting their beliefs, they will not kill them. You overcome something because you need to. So I think if he was a nice guy and he was letting her do things she wanted, I don't think she would have had a problem with him at all. He was an obstruction for him. Well, Nietzsche, I think, so that's one point, that I don't think they would necessarily, so when Nietzsche talks about the death of God, first of all, myth building, myths, religion, it's a very beautiful process and it's there for a reason. And because we need that, The reason we overcome these things in certain people, like people who become atheists or agnostic or change religions, is the dominant narrative that they have in their mind no longer suits their objectives, no longer works for them. So it's like a snake. If a snake does not shed its skin, it's going to die. But the skin in the first place was there for a reason because it was protecting him. So when Nietzsche talks about the
It's
death
a
of
good
God,
analogy.
he's only talking about it in terms of it no longer suiting him. That's one of the problems we can see with religion sometimes is religions want to be there for indefinitely. There is no religion that comes with a 500-year time period. That's just it is like I have expiry date. The problem is like it says like okay guys we are gonna be here forever, like this is what it is, this
Yeah.
is God's work. So that sometimes can create problems because even language itself changes. Like 4,000 years from now, even if you have like who's gonna really be able to understand? Like a lot of young people when they read some of the religious books, they're like it's kind of weird. Why are they talking
And
like
that was
that?
and that wasn't that long ago. That was only
That wasn't
500
that
years
long
ago.
ago,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And if probably those guys were reading something from 4,000 years ago from Egypt or somewhere, they were probably like, okay, guys, they're like, oh, I see why you're saying that. But the way you're describing this stuff, I mean, yeah, of course, you should be a nice person, but the way you use Thai should be this and that. It just seems weird.
Yeah.
And because of that, you need new values. The thing is, and you described something, and so many things came to my mind. I'm just going to brush up on 2 to 3 things very briefly.
Okay.
Now, one thing is when Nietzsche, these guys talk about the death of God, it doesn't mean it's gone forever. It means something is a replacement needs to be there. So if you read Nietzsche's first 2 pages when he talks about death of God, actually he's pretty sad. He's
No,
like,
right. I didn't mean to say it was a celebration. It
no,
wasn't a
no,
celebration. He was
no, no.
like
A lot
saying,
of people
yeah,
think so, right?
yeah,
For
yeah,
his
yeah,
style.
yeah.
He, he
If I implied that, that's not what I meant.
You did not. I'm just, correcting for some people who are listening or people who might associate Nietzsche being like, oh yeah,
It wasn't
that's
like,
what
yeah, God is dead. Yeah, it wasn't that. It wasn't that.
he's
Yeah.
not. He said he's sad because he's like, guys, what's gonna replace this? There
Hmm.
is no replacement right now. You need a replacement at some point, but right now it's gonna go down. And we had and a lot of the conflicts actually happened because of that. If you see after Nietzsche's age, so many conflicts happened: the rise of nihilism, right of Nazism. Like because if Nazis were hardcore religious people, I doubt they would have done anything close to that because there was no meaning anymore. So you always need to replace the meaning. If you don't like something that doesn't work for you, your subconscious always, that's why as you mentioned before, Jung says that you will always see a religious outlook on any culture. At a certain point it will become religious because your mind needs that. It's a very good thing. Now that's one part. You need to overcome something, and you need to have new values only if they stop serving you. So Eva might not have killed him, I think. Why would you waste your energy? At the end of the day, I'm sure as an AI person, you will certainly make decisions based on, okay, this is how much energy I'm going to spend on this. Is it worth me or not? If it's not worth it, why is it a problem? You only spend energy on something because you think it's no longer working with your worldview.
Right. And the snake, the great analogy that you used is the snake shedding its skin. The snake spends great energy and, in fact, suffers probably significantly during the process of shedding its skin because the new
And you
skin
know what?
is incredibly thin and unprotected.
Yes, and during the time it's happening, the snake is vulnerable. I was just watching this
Very vulnerable.
documentary. They do it very fast because anyone can come and sneak up on them.
It's a really good analogy to use, and I think my description earlier with Nietzsche's Death of God I portrayed it in the wrong way. I think made it seem like that was something that we should be celebrating. That this now that we have become rational and scientific, we no longer need God. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that's kind of what has just happened organically, where the structures of religions are so ossified, fossilized, that we no longer derive a lot of meaning from many of them, right? Like if someone is a Catholic, they just go because they go, and that's part of what they do, but they might not derive the same deep meaning that some priest writing down and doing the graphics. I can't remember what it's called. Have you ever seen the old pages of those old books that the monks used to spend years on these old Bibles, and they used to put designs and drawings all over them? I can't remember what that was called, but that was a religious experience to do that, a deeply religious experience to do that. And let's say modern Catholicism, that didn't work for a lot of people. So you get the snake coming out of its skin. Protestantism. Okay, Protestantism comes out. Then you have a bunch of denominations of Protestantism. And in America, people look around and they say, all right, well, I see this, televangelists asking me for money so that they can buy airplanes. It's not really working for me spiritually. So what is it that we're going to connect to? So that is, as you said, it is a better way to put it. The snake has to leave its skin and find or build a new skin. But the problem is we don't really have, in, let's say, at least the Western world, we don't really have a myth right now. And that's probably an issue. And we either need to create a myth, or a myth will be created naturally. If there's going to be a myth, hopefully it will be one that gives people a sense of meaning. Personally, I consider myself to be an atheist, but I go to temples of various religions and experience the parts of them that I like, and I read mythology, and I surround myself with the things that feel like magic, if that makes sense. And that's enough for me. That works for me. That doesn't maybe work for everybody, but that's the kind of thing that I think we need to figure out going forward, and I think that's what Nietzsche was sad about.
I think moving forward, we will have niches of meaning. A lot of people will have these small corners around the whole world, like our generation, many generations. They will, you see, like, if you had gone to YouTube 10 years ago versus you use the algorithms now, they're becoming so much more specific to you. It kind of surprises me sometimes. Like, because, every mind has their niches, like it goes in there. It's essentially replicated. So people want more and more variety. Like, people don't wear the same jeans now. Everyone has a different thing. And the thing is, our technology and everything provides us with that. Like, everyone has their own drinks. Like, oh, I like, in the old days, you would just have like Coke, or you'll have two drinks. Now, oh, I like sparkling water. Oh, I like this. Oh, I like that. Like 40 different things, because people are kind of being spoiled a little bit. Like, oh, I like iPhone. Oh, I like Samsung. I like this software. Like, so much differentiation, and the capitalism marketplace, and you expect it to satisfy your niche demands. Now, in the old days, I think it was a good thing that we had a dominant narrative. For hundreds of millions of people, you have Christians. Hundreds of millions of people, like billions, Muslims. Billions are Muslims, billions Christians. What is the third largest religion?
The third largest religion? I don't know if it's Hinduism or Buddhism. Or Judaism. I don't know which one is larger. I don't know the relative population size. Yeah, it's a lot.
So top 5 religions kind of map up probably most of the world population, which I think is a good thing, because it's a larger collective identity.
Yeah.
And within that, of course, it's more complicated. There are micro segments, but you have a larger narrative that so many people share. Like in the Muslim world, a lot of people actually share and it feels good to be a Muslim, to be honest with you, because you have something in the whole world, a very collective identity in some ways. I think moving forward, what worries me is like, we won't be able to have such big collective identities. The identities with myths or religion are going to become like more and more niche, and that does worry me a little bit. Like, and second thing, I think the expiry time for those myths is going to get faster and faster. People are
high iteration myths. What myth did you believe in last week? Well, that's if that's the case, and that's very interesting. That's the topic for a whole discussion probably. But if that's the case, then you're looking at where people talk about, oh, what's the modern myth, then there will be no modern myth, and we won't even know when they will appear, but we won't even have names for them. Maybe we won't even know what exactly they are, just because they're just kind of there and constantly evolving and changing. And that's a very interesting thought, but who knows what that looks like? That's fascinating.
One of the problems I see with that, a lot of the religion so far, and I think that's one of the beautiful things, it's very physical. Like you go to the church, you go there, you do something, you meet with someone, you interact. It's very much like based on your senses. You go to a mosque, you pray, you meet everyone. You're very nice, very
Community,
beautiful.
yeah.
Social media. Social media is gonna be an interesting thing, because if you start seeing new myths being created and propagated on social media, that's like a very virtual twist on something that used to be very communal. It is communal still, because your mind cannot get out of the communal thing. You will always need communal things. But if they start becoming more virtual, I think that could, create some problems.
Yes, the physical, tangible. I mean, I don't think anyone could argue that anything social media related could become the myth or replace, unless it takes on characteristics very different from what we have now. I mean, now it's an engine for addiction and the suffering of teenage girls who are looking at too many Instagram models, right? I mean, it's generally seen as negative now, right? More or less. And there are pockets of goodness on the internet, but yeah, I mean, there's just no way to know, but it does seem like there has to be something. But it may just become totally decentralized and nothing completely universal, because there's too much diversity, which could be a good thing. But if there's so much diversity, how do you find that communal aspect? Because you need to have some shared understandings in order to, when you go to a mosque to pray, you need to know, or it's nice to know, that the other people who are in there are there for the same reason that you're there, right? That might sound like a silly thing to say, but that basic assumption is what provides the basis for the communal, right? Yeah, yes. And so I don't know how do we have that in the modern sphere. I'm not sure.
What do you think? Where do you see things going? What's your? I'm sure you've had a chance to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of modern myths, I really have no idea. I really don't. And
you think it could just go anywhere, or do you think we'll be fine? What do you?
No, I think going back to your snake analogy, when the snake leaves its skin, the skin begins to thicken by itself, right?
Well, it's been a while.
It's been a while. The pendulums swing, right? So the pendulum has swung, and we have, in certain cultures, subcultures, high suicide rates. Clearly, let's say middle-aged men are struggling with finding meaning in the world and are addicted to opioids. There are symptoms of a need for some kind of personal myth to believe in. And I believe that everybody needs a myth of some kind to believe in, something higher, something spiritual. I mean, I don't have a religion, but you got to have something. You need something, whatever it is. I just don't know what form it will take. And to speculate on it for me is almost, it's kind of hopeless. But I think that it's going to be like the snake skin. I think it's going to happen just because it has to happen. Because if it doesn't happen, then things will get worse and worse, right? More and more suffering and misery. Some people suggest that hallucinogenic drugs will be the answer. And I think that's a valid possibility.
No, I don't think so. I think those things have been tried out. Like in the 60s, 70s, people went deep into that kind of stuff. No, nothing's there. You saw like the movement in California, the hippie culture and stuff. I think that did not give us any answer. Like people who worked there, people who were involved in that scenario, it did not continue. That also makes me think how religions who are successful are so amazing. Because you have had these small experiments, like, the small communities that surrounded all over the US, like a guy who took like 400 people with him to start a religion, like big disasters.
Yeah.
Then,
no kidding.
Big disasters.
Always disasters.
Then, so that was kind of a good, because, that's not really easy to do, but because of our capitalism, our age, we were able to give them resources. We were able to give them transportation. We were able to give them safety. Like they had all of these things going for them, and people were really interested. That still did not work. Now, as you mentioned, psychedelics, you can see like in 60s, 70s, there was a huge trend in psychedelics. And these days you can see people are going towards like marijuana and stuff. I think nothing's there.
Well, okay, so I'm not a psychedelics user, okay, but I think the jury is out, because what happened in the 60s, I think, opened a door, and then the door was slammed shut for political reasons. The war on drugs closed the door. It didn't close because it failed. So I think there is a potential future with, and I'm not saying, I'm not proposing anything. I'm just saying I think that the pendulum has to swing the other way. Just because the snake skin grows back, the pendulum swings. I think one possibility is that, and I think you could be right, but I think that there is a possibility of hallucinogenic drugs providing meaning. There are examples of people who have done case studies with psilocybin who were terminal, and they had one strong psychedelic experience, and then became at peace with their terminal illness. There are studies being done in respectable laboratories with DMT, ayahuasca, and these psychedelic, non-addictive psychedelic drugs are starting to come back into public awareness, starting to change in legal status. And I think we could start seeing in the next 10 years if that is a possibility or not, because there are some interesting ideas about how well before we had modern religions, the earliest religions were based on our consumption of psychedelic plants and mushrooms especially, and the early religions sprung out of that, the use of those psychedelic plants. And there's even a theory that consciousness comes from the use of psychedelics to begin with, that early upright walking primates were eating everything that they found. One of the things that they found was psychedelic mushrooms that had an effect of giving them more sexual potency, visual acuity at low doses, and that at higher doses they would have increased the sensibility to connect with others and dissolve the boundaries between yourself and the other person, and have a sort of separation of egos dissolved, which is what psychedelics apparently do. I'm reading a book on it right now called Food of the Gods. It's really, really interesting. So I'm not even a proponent of it. I just think that the door should be left open for the possibility. But I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe traditional religion is the key, and they just need to be updated or something like that. I just don't know. Something to watch. Well, I wanted to get into the genius question. Is there anything you wanted to mention about consciousness or the God question that we didn't get into?
When we talked about the painting and how there is this delicate balance between the free-flowing versus the structured, I was going to raise the question, is that what makes a genius? Are you a genius if you can manipulate them properly? So that's just one thing I like to add, which I think kind of works. Like if you can have the best balance between structure and, I don't know what's the best word. Free-flowing is not really the best word. Randomness, I guess.
Well, mythology would say order and chaos.
Order and chaos, yeah.
Father, order, mother, chaos.
And that idea goes back so long. It's kind of interesting. Like that's been existed for so long. Yeah, I think that's a good way to see. And with genius, I think I was just gonna say maybe, in terms of Nathan and in general, like genius is what we see. The CEOs are like some Steve Jobs kind of people. Anyone who we ascribe as a genius, like Jesus, like is that what they did? Maybe they found like that perfect balance between structure, chaos, and the other things. Chaos and
order and chaos.
Order and chaos. So I think that's one point I just wanted to add.
Yeah, absolutely. And the mythology supports that going back. The feminine represents chaos, and bringing in the unknown is the source of life, the beginning always where life comes from, but is potentially chaotic. Nature, Mother Nature, order, father, paternal, strict, rules, structure. But if you have too much structure, nothing changes. Static condition. Bring the two together and walk the line between them, and beautiful things happen. The creation of an AI, a painting, a hero straddling that line, which is a beautiful line to straddle. It's quite interesting. What about the actual nature of Nathan? I mean, you see, it seems like so many geniuses always tend to have strange personalities. Steve Jobs would be an example, not just the order chaos thing, but actually in terms of personality. Do you see that eccentric nature, needing to live in the middle of nowhere, far away from everybody? Is that something that's built into being a revolutionary or being a genius? Or can you be a normal dude and be a genius? Can you be a normal person?
I think that idea is completely blown out of proportion. Oh, a genius, the reclusive genius. Yes, you have them. The Howard Hughes.
Yeah.
Right? Crazy guy. But if you think about it, I think it's like one of the things media does. Oh, a genius, a crazy guy drinking to oblivion, does not understand social interaction. Like, no. I certainly think those people are anomalies. And the reason media uses them, like movies, cinema, anywhere, is because they make a good story.
Yeah.
Like, who wants a genius who's perfectly normal? To be honest, a lot of the physicists, if you meet them, like they are really smart people, probably one of the smartest people. If you see them, they're very normal.
Yeah,
they perfectly understand.
Nobody makes movies about them. They're boring.
They perfectly understand all the social dynamics.
Yeah.
You don't, again, and that's another debate, and that's a very interesting topic, like comedians. Like, a lot of people think in order to be a really funny comedian, you have to be kind of fucked up. Like, a lot of people, you have to have some depression. You have to. But if you see like Jerry Seinfeld and all these people, and that's what they say. They say you don't have to be a weirdo to be someone who is very good. Like, Jerry Seinfeld is one of the geniuses in comedy, but perfectly normal guy. Perfectly normal. In some things, okay, everyone is different. But people think, oh, in order to be a genius, you have to be like a savant or something. I think that's certainly...
It's an interesting point. So you sort of like are creating a funnel through which you view geniuses, because the funnel is the eccentric ones are the ones you hear about, right?
Exactly.
That's the funnel. Yeah, because there are many others out there. We just don't care about their stories because they just live in a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs.
So much.
Yeah.
Like, what about Bill Gates? No one talks about Bill Gates like him. He's a perfectly normal guy, and I'm sure he's equally smart as Steve Jobs, but he doesn't make for good stories. He doesn't make for tabloid press. He doesn't make for like all the gossip. So I think that's a bias we have as humans, and we certainly as a society need to understand that, that's, in any domain, technology or politics or stuff like that, you don't have to be a crazy guy to be very smart.
That's a fair point. Although, I think it does play a major role in this particular story. I agree with you in general. I think it plays an important role in this story. The fact that he lives so far away, the fact that he drinks so much, I think plays an important role. Did you draw anything from, why make a character who's constantly drunk? Is it guilt? Is he guilty because he's done such horrible things to the previous iterations and he knows he's destroying consciousness because they're conscious? Or because he has that quote when he gets really drunk and he says, the good deeds a man has done before defend him. The good deeds a man has done before defend him. The good deeds a man has done before defend him. Remember, he says that again and again when he gets super drunk. Meaning what? Meaning I created Blue Book. I did this great thing for humanity. Now I trap these sentient women and perhaps dismantle them, but I'm protected by the good things that I've done in my life, in a sense.
I mean, he could have said the same thing without being drunk. So I think this is this element. I think it's a very nice movie, but it was kind of unnecessary. Like having him drink all the time and like on the couch. I'm like, okay, you're just trying to be interesting.
I think they had him drinking because of guilt. I think that's a possibility because because consciously he knew what he was doing was horrible. What he was doing was essentially torturing people at what point do you consider the prototypes or the early versions of Ava people? Okay, so if they're experiencing pain and they're suffering, and you're trying to create something, you're trying to tell yourself that you're not doing that. It's sort of like someone who works in a lab and they feel guilty about killing rats or something like that. You know you're doing something you don't believe is right, but you're still doing it because you feel you have to do it. Maybe that's not a great example, but
I see
the
what
guilt.
you're saying. The problem is, whenever he was near his computer, that's where the magic is happening.
Yeah.
It was very rational. I did not see any guilt at all. I think the drinking part, the movie tried to maybe embody, he's probably doing something horrible. Not necessarily. That could just have been a part of his personality. It doesn't necessarily like drinking excessively. It's guilt is not the only reason why people do that.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
a base assumption. Whenever he was near the computer, that's I think another important thing to keep in mind while watching the movie is whenever he was near the computer, how was he? Who was he? What he was thinking? What was his behavior? And in all those occasions, because that's really where the magic is happening.
Yeah.
And in all those occasions, I found him to be very rational. I did not find him having any kind of guilt, and he had all answers. He had good answers. Whenever, like the other guy, he asked. He was probably the smartest guy, one of the smartest guys in his company, and he came up. He asked him hard questions.
Yeah.
And Nathan was able to give satisfactory answers, very rational answers, very philosophical answers. So I think even if he had been guilty, he certainly was able to overcome that. Like a smart guy. He's a smart guy. He overcame,
Maybe.
He justified. So I think drinking was, I don't know. I think it's just a personality thing, or they were trying to be interesting.
Okay. All right. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. It's tough. Yeah. Maybe because I know people who drink because of guilt for something they did excessively, and maybe that has colored my perception of it. But I don't know. I see that this film, I just try to, maybe I'm drawing lines between dots that don't exist, but I think that this film in particular is very intentional. Everything seems extremely intentional. And so when I see that, I think, well, why would they do that? Why couldn't they just have him be a regular guy? All right, fair enough, because he has to be drunk so that they can do the thing at the end. I guess that makes sense, but I don't know. You might be right. I would concede the point.
Think about who he was before Ava. I think that can help us. He's living alone. That's one factor to contribute to certain behaviors. He's living on his own. I don't know. He seems like a very indifferent person. Very indifferent. So someone who, do you think he had a meaning in life?
I think he had. I think his purpose is to create. I think he's compelled. I don't know. Is there a difference between purpose and compulsion? I think he has a compulsion that drives him almost mad. And I think that he knows that there is a chance that he's going to die. I think that he's almost relieved that he dies at the end, in a sense, because he has this compulsion that's driving him to do this thing. Whether that's a purpose, I don't know the line between compulsion and purpose, but he's being driven to do this thing, to create this intelligence that has never existed before. And the perfect ending to that is to end his own existence.
But at the end, he gave up drinking.
Yeah.
He gave up drinking, and also he would actually work out pretty hardcore right after drinking. So that is something interesting as well.
Yeah.
There is
Fair enough.
something on, because if he had, I see where you're coming from, and that makes a lot of sense. But if he had these, self-destructive tendencies or all those things, why would he give up drinking? He was like, okay, I have came too far. So but what were we talking about? Why did we bring it up? What was the theme?
Well, I just brought it. We were talking about the nature of eccentrics and why Nathan is the way he is.
Material over there, a lot of material. It was certainly a very, very interesting character. He was also he wasn't too nerdy. That's what I really enjoyed. He wasn't nerdy at all. He was very much he was a cool dude. He had philosophical answers. He didn't get too much into technology. He didn't get too much into the meaning of life. He was very much just chill.
Yeah.
I got that.
I got the feeling of One time I was at Thanksgiving with my grandmother, and I was sitting beside her. She's 80, 82 or something like that. And
Yeah.
I looked around at everyone at Thanksgiving, all her progeny. And I said, you created all this. She said, yes, I know. Like, she gave me this knowing look. And I thought, wait a second. Like, we are all her, right?
Yeah.
In a sense, she had 5 children. They had each 3 or 4 children. They've now started having children. These 50 people are at Thanksgiving, all because of her, right? And it sort of has. I sort of got this sense of, and there's also, I believe there's a story in Hinduism where there's a god who is alone, and he creates. I think he creates an animal. It might have been a goat, and then he changes into a goat and mates with the goat, and then the goat changes into another animal, and he changes into that one and mates with that one, and it goes on until all the creatures have been created. But essentially, because he was alone. Ultimately, he was alone, and he wanted to populate the universe. So you populate the universe with yourself, and you have to lie to yourself to convince yourself that you're not ultimately alone. Now, I'm not saying that's true of my grandma, because everybody's their own person, and humans are so complex that we say we really are different people, and we aren't really alone because we're with other people. But in a sense, his assistant is a robot. Ava is a robot. Everyone he's around is a robot. It is just an extension of himself. It's almost like he's externalizing aspects of himself. He's done one for a sexual purpose. He's done one for maybe an intellectual purpose. He's projecting himself outward into his creations, and that shows, I think, either a very fundamental deep loneliness or a fundamental deep satisfaction with yourself. I'm not sure which one it is.
Or maybe both.
Maybe both.
I think what is interesting, and I really like what you said, that makes a lot of sense and very natural. And also interesting thing is he didn't wanted to create an extension of himself in the normal way. He didn't reproduce with someone. He created these robots, which tells you something about himself, what he thinks about himself. He's like, the descendants of me would be worthy. They have to be worthy enough. Like, when you go for a mating partner, you want them to fulfill a certain criteria.
Yeah.
I guess for him, no one fulfilled that criteria. And he was like, let me make it on my own. So that also tells you something about himself. Like, he wants to be something beyond. He thinks at a very different level.
God complex. God complex for sure. I mean, he talks about it several times, right? Not only the motif of being the God which is destroyed in order to create room for Ava, but also an actual God. There is also the reference to the Oppenheimer quote, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds." Do you know where that's from? That's a very interesting reference.
I don't know.
So the Bhagavad Gita is this story of the main character Arjuna is going to go to war with another faction in his family, and he knows he's going to slaughter many of his family members in this war, and he's conflicted. He doesn't know if he should do it, and his charioteer is an avatar of Vishnu, and the entire Bhagavad Gita is this conversation between these two armies. They're right in the middle of these two armies, in the middle of the battlefield before the battle has started, and he's having this deep philosophical conversation with his charioteer, who is an avatar of Vishnu. And they have this long conversation about yoga and about meditation and life and why you should fight your family members and live out your dharma and all this stuff. And then at the end, he says to his charioteer, Arjuna says to Krishna, Krishna is the avatar of Vishnu, he says, "Please show me your true form." And he shows him his true form. He says, no human has ever seen it. He gives him a third eye, and he sees the true form of him, and it's this eternal form, but it's not a pleasant form. It has these horrible, bloody jaws, and it's consuming people, as in sort of everybody dies, sort of consuming people. And then Arjuna says, "Please stop. I can't bear it anymore. It's too too horrible. So it's the idea that this God character is, by its nature, being a god, so powerful that a mere human can't comprehend it without being horrified, because any sort of comprehension of that level of divine has to come with horror, because horror involves killing the innocent, babies dying, all of that stuff. It has to include that, or else it isn't truly the divine. And during that time when he is that form, he says, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds." That's the most famous line from the Bhagavad Gita. That's what he says. Oppenheimer quoted that after they created the nuclear bomb, the first nuclear bomb. Oppenheimer quoted the Bhagavad Gita and said, "I'm become death, destroyer of worlds, because now I have the power of God." And they're bringing that back to Nathan now being potentially this person who's unleashing this new version of consciousness, which could be our destruction. I think it's an interesting parallel.
That's very cool. I missed on all of that. That's very cool.
Oh, it's an amazing book. I read it recently. It's very good. I wanted to I thought we could do sort of a, is there anything we didn't talk about in relation to the nature of genius, God, consciousness, anything that we didn't get to that you wanted to bring up? Because I wanted to do a kind of just like a lightning round of quick questions, answers, thoughts.
I'm ready for the lightning round.
All right. Maybe I can just ask you, hey, what do you think about this? And we just do a sort of quick thought on it. Yeah. The nature of the facility. Did you think there was any intention there with the way that it's laid out in amid this giant forest? Then you have this very well-structured place, glass walls everywhere. Did you get any vibes from that?
I mean, the architecture was brutalism, and it didn't seem like very cozy, very comfortable, and it had a very good contrast to the nature around it.
Yeah.
So you can see the stark comparison to things. But I don't know. I feel like, I don't know. What do you think? Did you find
fair enough
there?
Stark contrast, order versus chaos. Nature encroaching, order inside the facility, and chaos is always about to, if you look at the walls, there's one wall where you have the stone part of the inside of the wall is the stone like cave of the waterfall, and you have this constant conflict of nature and chaos coming together. So I think you're right.
And do you think both things blended well, or was there some?
One thing that I noticed right at the beginning of the film was all the key card stuff. I thought, man, this is very Skinner, rats in a maze.
I thought there's something to this. They're gonna use this somewhere.
Very rats in a maze sort of stuff feeling. Yeah. Did you make anything of the first? There's a stab in his back, and then there's a stab in his front. I thought that seemed intentional. I have no idea, but you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think it can be interpreted, when he stabs someone in the back, it's kind of like, it's different. It's a different thing. You stab someone in the back. And then I think once she stabbed, like the back would have been enough, but then she also showed himself. She's like, I am very powerful. I am not just like a backstabbing. It's just a dominant thing. It's a power. It's a exertion of power.
Well said. Power move. Yeah, I agree. We talked about Ava leaving Caleb in the locked room. What about the sticky notes? Tons of sticky notes on Nathan's wall. Yeah.
Yeah, he was. It just tells you he's very detail oriented. It tells you that he wants to make sure, like everything. He's very systematic in a way, and he want to make sure he puts in everything. So it, in a way, reflects his devotion to his work.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. And yeah, the sticky notes thing. Even a man who has all the technology in the world still needs a sticky note. Something tactile, something physical. You need to organize your thoughts. As though our Ava wouldn't need it because she runs on wetware. We need it because we run on, beef jerky ware. We're a meat structure, so we need physical stuff in front of our eyeballs. I kind of got that. What about the idea that maybe the space between the sessions are the sessions?
Oh yeah, I remember reading that. The space between the sessions. are the sessions? Are the sessions for whom are we talking? Like
Well,
for
I don't know. That thought kept coming back to me because they break it down: session 1, session 2, session 3, and even right before Ava kills Nathan, they call that session 7. That's session 7.
Oh. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Maybe there could be, by the please ignore the sound. It's
No,
the 7
this
p.m.
is good
quarantine.
documentary stuff. We're really, this is proof that we're really doing this at the time that we say we are. I post this on a particular
Does this
date.
happen in your neighborhood?
Yeah.
7 p.m. Okay. So I think the session was interesting. Maybe it's reflecting the subconscious and the conscious. So whatever happens between the sessions, that is kind of the training and stuff which would unfold in the sessions themselves.
Right. Yeah.
So that's one way to look at it. That's kind of the preparing of the show. But what happens between the show is equally important as what goes on.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's a good way to say it. Yeah. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, so I think I agree with that.
Did they say that in the movie, or did you just think of that? Because I really like the phraseology.
I just kept thinking that thought during the movie as I was watching it. Like the sessions, because they're writing so clearly, session 1, it's a misdirection. We're misdirecting you. Session 1 is not important. It's the space between session 1 and session 2 that you should pay attention to. Like defining something by its opposite. You draw something by drawing around it. Like that sort of idea, a relief. Last one of these, Through the Looking Glass. That was mentioned several times. Alice in Wonderland. I don't know that much about Alice in Wonderland, but they kept bringing up, or it was once or twice, Through the Looking Glass, meaning the second story of Alice in Wonderland. But I haven't read it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have no idea on that either.
The only thing I know is that in Alice in Wonderland, she steps through her mirror and goes into the land of the Red Queen. I don't know exactly what happens, but it's the idea of always having something between you and someone else, and as soon as you go through there, everything changes. And so it's something like when Ava finally leaves her room, she moves into the real world. And for her, the real world is the world that maybe Alice moved into when she goes through her mirror, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. That's pretty good.
That needs more fleshing out, I think, though, for sure, because I haven't read.
That can be taken in so many ways, and I think that's one of the ways to express that. And that does do justice, and it makes a lot of sense. Once you move beyond that wall, then is when you encounter the real elements. You encounter the reality. You encounter the upside, but you also encounter the threats and everything that comes with the real world.
Actually, there is one more I forgot to mention. Ava wrapping herself in skin at the end.
Yeah.
Why did they spend so much time on that? I mean, they really
I think it was
focus on
important.
that. Yeah.
Because she was so smart. She understood, like, as soon as she goes near the helicopter, goes out in the real world, she does not has a chance. She has to blend in. So she learned that. She learned how she should blend in. And I was surprised how amazing those skins were. Like, very realistic. And I think she was just very smart. She wanted to make sure, like, even the helicopter guy, if she was like a robot, he would be skeptical. So she learned how to make sure she blends in very well in the world after that.
And I think also that it proves that our perceptions are really only skin deep of other people. We will look at a person and see that they appear normal, and then we'll make decisions on that basis without going much deeper to understand. She knows that she can get away in the world with whatever she wants to do. She'll probably become a CEO of a major company because she's so intelligent. And she knows all she needs is some skin. That's all she has to do, right? She doesn't have to prove anything else. I mean, she has to obviously have her personality, but that's sort of a symbol for that maybe motif of maybe our ability to perceive people's real intentions or what a person is really like is limited because we don't put in the time to do it. Maybe that's a critique of modern culture. I don't know. But when that scene is happening, Caleb is watching her through the trees. So there's a tree symbolism there that I picked up. The trees surround the place, right? And there's he looks through the roots of the tree when she's putting on her skin through the other room. And it seems like the tree branches and roots are sort of encroaching into this place. And in mythology, trees, I always, since I started this podcast, have been looking out for trees because they come up so often as symbols. They're always symbols of creation. Trees are always symbols of creation. Christ, sacrifice, cross, that's a tree. Odin sacrificing himself to himself, he does it on a tree. The Buddha becoming enlightened, sitting under a tree. The tree of knowledge is a tree. There's always this tree motif, always accompanies creation. And so I don't know if it's intentional there, but I did see him looking through the tree and then the trees surrounding the compound being this sort of symbol of possible creation. And then intersection is the other thing I wrote down. Why does she want to see an intersection?
Intersection of?
She talks about, remember when they're having I think it might be session 2, he says, where would you go if you could go out? And she says, I might go to a busy intersection. And he says, interesting choice. And then at the end of the film, she does go to a busy intersection. She stands at an intersection. I don't know why that would be her place of choice. Any thoughts on that one? I don't know.
I think that's interesting. I think one of the reasons for that could be the level of diversity you encounter on an intersection, because the parallel to an intersection would be a road, a journey. That's how we usually think about a journey, a road, a street is ahead of me. Intersection is a four-way street. You could go anywhere. So I think that means being open to possibilities. That means encountering diversity and observing diversity. And that means, taking it all in and not, putting down a set path that you are not like, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to take the Northfield Street. No, you're like, I can take 4 of the streets. So I think that's what it could be.
Yeah. I agree. And for an artificial intelligence, what better place to feed your training algorithms?
Definitely.
Or train your training algorithms. Well, I think that's all this. I think we covered pretty much everything I wanted to cover. And we covered a lot of territory for sure. Is there anything that you feel like we missed that you wanted to mention or go over or talk about?
I think we did a decent job.
I think we did a pretty decent job as well. Well,
we wanted to.
Thanks for doing it. I really, really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we'll have to do it. We'll have to do it again sometime.